Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Kyle Dupick with Garrett Boyam and our guest today, Tommy Johnson.
Yeah, and so Tommy and I have been going back and forth on social media for quite a long time. And just given how much of the back and forth, it's like, you know what? I think it's time to bring Tommy on the podcast. And so I guess to start, Tommy, do you want to just kind of give people a little background on like who you are and what you're currently doing?
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
Yeah. Do you want me to start from the beginning? Because I will usually not talk about myself. So I can film in my experience and then what I do and how I got there.
Whatever you think is most important and what you think would be interesting for people.
Okay.
Because I think even too, right? The last podcast you're on was Chad's, right? And so that's been a little while. So maybe, people have kind of, don't actually know really your whole story.
Yeah. Well, I've also been less accessible since having kids and, changing my priorities a little bit over the past few years, but just kind of fill everybody in. Played a little professional baseball. I got drafted by the Mariners in 2008 or 9. Can't remember. Then I realized I had no idea what I was doing. Once my career was over, I had no idea why I had failed. A lot of it was because I just didn't have the mindset or even the background on how to actually get myself back to who I really was after being coached and coached and coached. So I also didn't know how to train my body either. So that was this big question mark because there's this P90X era. And that kind of screwed me up because I just looked really good but couldn't move. So I went back and got my master's in exercise science. And I think I took almost every certification I could after that. Following that, started my own business. It was in 2014. It was Prime Performance, but during COVID, I rebranded and called it Primal One because I Primal One baseball player development. And the reason I did that is one, I wanted something new, but then two, I also realized because I tried to get out of the baseball game and people just kept coming to me. So I was like, okay, well, actually need to rebrand it into baseball. And then I got bored and I decided to take a doctorate courses, and I just completed my doctorate in kinesiology this past spring. So it's been quite an adventure getting to where I am, but a lot of it's been motivated by the people I have the opportunity to train. They put so much money into what we do, and they put in so much effort and trust into me. It only made sense that I kept pushing to make sure that I had the best resources to help them reach their goals. So, and the doctorate was quite an adventure. And I think I definitely gained a lot more respect for the motor control and learning aspects of things. And I definitely, biomechanics, I became more appreciative when I actually had to start doing the math rather than relying on systems to do it for me. So it's I was extremely humbled, and it was quite an experience, but now I'm here. And yeah, it's been a wonderful ride, and I'm very grateful I get to do what I do every day.
So on the one thing that there's several things that kind of jumped out at me, but one thing that I'm kind of most curious on is, you kind of mentioned that you were trying to get out of baseball, but then you got pulled back in. What's the story behind that of because a little bit too, I have a little bit of experience with that of, initially I started in S&C, and then I was like, okay, I'll just I know life is weird, and sometimes you plan on going one direction and then you fall into a niche, or you end up somewhere different. But I exited out of the S&C space and came back into the skill side of things. And so I'm kind of curious, what's your story behind that of the why behind you were trying to go out, but then you got pulled back in?
Yeah. So I've never gotten out of S&C because I run a full player development facility, but I was trying not to limit myself to just baseball players because you're running a business. Baseball is extremely seasonal, and trying to explain the athletes the importance of hey, you got to make it in for a strength session, because if you are in pain or something feels weird, these are things that we can reconcile if you come in. But if you're out of season, or if you're in season, you're out of the facility and you're on your own, if you can't make it in. And a lot of times people don't have the knowledge, and they'll just shut themselves down and they're out 4 to 6 weeks, and then they never really resolve the issue because their doctor just tells them to rest, and okay, yeah, you're getting out of pain temporarily, but then once you start back up, it's the same old thing. So it was really, I just rebranded it. It was pretty much as simple as that. And I listened to Charlie Weingroff. I was very, very lucky to have been invited down with the Washington Wizards, because I knew a guy named Naveen Heterachi. I mean, this guy's brilliant. He's fantastic. He reached out to me. He was like, hey, would you like to watch Charlie Weingroff speak at the then MCI Center? I was like, yeah, this guy terrifies me because he's so damn smart, but I know I'm going to come home with a million notes. And the thing that stuck out to me was, he goes, if you're trying to do the best thing for your athlete, you're going to build a team. And that stuck out to me because I used to try to do everything myself. And that's why I equipped myself with all these different skills. But there was only one me, and there was only so many hours in the day, and I was growing a family. And I just looked at it as man, I'm not giving my people the best thing. So that was kind of the big wake up call. I think that was 2017, 2016, something like that. And the rest has been history. And what I really am trying to do at my facility is just try to provide the most logical information I can in an onboarding, so that way I have a structure and a framework for the people I hire to work with me. And I basically put my brain in a spreadsheet, and multiple spreadsheets, so that way they can understand me. And then I attach video links and stuff like that. And I guess really kind of to get back to the main thing is what brought me back into baseball? Well, what really got me into the teamwork aspect was Charlie Weingroff, and realizing that it wasn't about me. It was about the people I worked with. And I needed to find a way to clone myself in different areas of player development, whether it be strength conditioning or skill acquisition. So it was really the whole idea. And I was also lucky because the very first person I ever learned from in the S&C field was Mike Boyle. So I was a baseball guy up at this facility up north, and he got into the Thrive program, which is basically they just buy their programs and the information, they implement it in the facility. But I got to go up, spend time with Mike Boyle and Kevin Carr, and that was a real rude awakening. I was like, dude, I don't know anything. And that's what got me curious, is because I was like, man, I'm really doing these people a disservice, because I was a baseball player and I was just trying to teach people what I knew. But I always come back to this. It's well, how many people could do what I did and had no idea what they were doing? And I'm 240 pounds. I hit yesterday. I still hit a ball 102. I haven't hit in a few months. And it's the reality check is well, how do I get people to that point? How do I get people to acquire some of the, I was blessed. I was super blessed with a lot of ability. And I couldn't go off of my own individual bias and experiential process. I had to figure out what was best for people, not just what I did. So, Mike Boyle, Charlie Weingroff, and then I remember over COVID, I started really getting heavy into Franz Bosch, and it was just this guy is knocking down the silos. And it was, I think that's a world we're living in, and we have, and it's not to talk bad because people know what they know, but you have people working with professional athletes that couldn't even tell you how many degrees of freedom are in a hip joint. And, it's mind blowing to me, because it's man, I'm working with people from 8 years old up to big leagues. And it's you have people that are working just with big leaguers, and they couldn't tell you very much about the body and, the processes it uses to develop what it needs to thrive in a high level situation. And it's, it developed some concern for me. So then I got really curious. And to be honest with you, I think it was I remember one of our first interactions, Garrett. I was really into biomechanics at this one time. It's like, yeah, biomechanics are cool, but you can't really separate biomechanics from motor control because you're talking about a system, like a complex system, that integrates everything. It's nothing is one without the other. So I can't remember the question you asked me, but basically you're putting out there. It's like, well, yeah, this is great, but what if this happens and what are you going to do? And I was like, I need to think about this. And then, that there comes the like, okay, this guy is coming from a different angle. I need to learn this angle. And it's just, I think it's giving a full appreciation to the human organism and what it's capable of is really the end goal, right? So like, that's what Primal One I want it to be. And I'm still learning. I'm still trying to, I'm still trying to give people what they want, but also what I know is best, because it's like, I call it hiding the pill in the pudding or giving them a cookie. So it's like, we still deadlift. And it's like, I don't really think deadlift has the most transfer. It'll make you overall strong, but it does come at a cost if someone isn't ready. But if I can give someone that one little thing that they like, then they might do more of what I feel is going to be best for the athlete, which is going to be number one thing, honor the human system and how we got to where we are. So I guess you could say more of like an ontogenic approach. But yeah, I mean, that was long winded, but I hope that answers the question.
That's good. I wonder, you mentioned a couple times there, like, what was your gateway drug into the skill acquisition world? It feels like everybody kind of has their conversion story, if you will. You mentioned Franz Bosch. You've done a lot of degrees. You mentioned Garrett's question. How did you get into it? What was your starting point? And when did you kind of get hooked? Like, oh my gosh, there's something here that I really need to explore.
Well, I think it was just like at one point in time, baseball Twitter was this really fruitful place. And I'm not trying to be nostalgic because there's but it's like everyone is like sticking to this one thing rather than learning from each other. And that's one of the reasons I got off of Twitter or X now. And, I guess what really got me into is just curiosity, because like I'm addicted to understanding the human organism. It's just God has given us such an amazing design. And I honestly believe we're only appreciating a very small portion of it. And I was really big in the PRI, and that helped me kind of move forward with some of this like biomechanics stuff. And then I started noticing that like, okay, yeah, once we do that, the breathing, it gets them right, and they're moving better, they're operating better in a sense that they're not constantly running on hot. And I just started noticing that there was more to it than just biomechanics. So I was searching for an answer because I was into the T. And then I think someone mentioned it was like, I wasn't really that I was into it. It's just like what we've always done in baseball. And then I was just like, okay, well, they have a tee at home. Why are they paying me to go hit off the tee? This is nonsense. If they want to do what we do off a tee at home because that's their only method of practice that they have, and okay, so be it, but they're not going to do it with me. So I think it really came into, I got deeper into it after Franz Bosch, and I was talking with, I think really seeing some of the things Rob Gray was putting out and really made me question myself. It's like, okay, but this is actually how people learn. It's been quantified. And it's like, well, if it's been quantified, let me look into it. And it's just like, you start seeing some of the articles that he did, and that guy's like super honest, in my opinion, like in his evaluation of things. And it just made me really, besides being curious about everything that is human, because I think that's like what we really need to do as baseball coaches, or just coaches in general, is appreciate who's in front of us, and not just the personality, but like their structure, their function. There's just so much to us. It would be so pompous of me to think that I shouldn't keep learning. So it's like you see all these umbrellas of kinesiology, and it's like, okay, well, if I can skim the surface on all of them and start digging little holes, what we're going to start seeing is that all these holes start connecting. And I remember I spoke with Ian Kadish years ago about this, and he's
with the Twins, right?
Yeah. What a wonderful guy, man. Like I caught him in college, and just like, dude was sick. Like he was good. I remember we were playing University of Kentucky, and we were beating them. We were Marshall, and we were beating them when he was in the game. That guy was awesome. And he's brilliant too. So like Ian's, I haven't talked to him in a while, but every interaction I have had since, just like a great dude and very smart. But he was talking about like silos and how like he felt like, everyone puts himself in a silo, and they don't, because there's the silo exists, they don't feel the need to go outside of their silo. And then it just becomes like, oh, well, that's not my job. So, like talk to him. And it's like, well, we're working together here. So the S&C should have some motor control and appreciation, and the hitting guy should have a physical therapy, athletic training, and strength conditioning appreciation to some level. And, I think it's best because now you can communicate. And if you can't communicate with your team and you're like, oh, well, what the hell are you talking about? Like that's that language. I don't understand it. Well, it's like, well, you have the problem. You don't understand the language. And this is something I find really interesting in today's baseball is like, we already have a language called kinesiology, the kinesiological language, but people tend to make up their own terms to sound, to sound interesting, and that's their prerogative.
Or to sell their system.
Oh man. Well, I have a real big problem with that, it hurts because then you're completely married to this thing. And even if it gets disproven, you have to fight and scratch and claw. And it's like, well, you wouldn't have that problem if you just appreciated everything and considered what you're doing, or, be humble and say, hey, this is what I thought was right at the time. But, we see that all the time in the scientific community. We see it with a lot of physics and space. People are going to have to go back on things, especially as quantum physics becomes more understood, and we're going to have to accept the new nature of things. Some feelings are going to get hurt. But I think if we're all lifelong students, then it's like, hey, look, that was just where I was when I was learning. I'm always learning. So sorry, you hired me. This is where I was. But yeah, it's been the best thing I've ever learned, because it really made me understand that I can't talk someone into success. And I have to really appreciate who's in front of me. And this is where there's a bunch of good systems out there. And I go back, I still use FMS because it's at least I have something. And I can't table test everyone unless, I got time. But, being the staff that I have, it's, there's me and 3 other dudes, running the show. It's okay, well, I can't put my hands on everyone all the time. So if I have the FMS, at least I can say, hey, look, we need to give you more options, because if you don't have prerequisite mobility and I'm trying to ask you to do X, Y, Z over in the batting cage, I'm not appreciating your current structure or your ability to align your structure for better movement. So I guess that's a biomechanical aspect. And, I think this is something that we're running to now is we're always looking for this magic pill and putting people in buckets. And it's well, I'm not going to talk bad, but I'm going to say this. It's okay, you're going to make someone choose from A or B to do as a hitter. It's well, if you understand the way humans learn, you understand the way these joint receptors work. It's you can expand a joint, you can give them more options. So it's essentially okay, there's only hamburger and hot dog on the menu right now, but if I add another thing to a menu, then you have another thing to pick from. And then you can self-organize and see which one is going to produce the results you want. You can measure that. Because I tip my cap to Driveline, because their biomechanics, their data, hitting's in a vacuum now. like we understand like the mean and standard deviation of it. I mean, they have a whole chart of it, and it's like, oh, if we use that, and if someone still falls in the outer ranges, it's still good, but does it function? And I think that's where, biomechanics is a slippery slope, because, if we're like, oh, well, they're so far away from the mean, the middle, and it's like, well, Kyle Tucker dumps his barrel, but dude rakes. Like, why would we change that? So, I think going back, I guess the original question was like, what was my gateway drug? And I think it was just overall curiosity of how to make the people who are investing in me better. Cause that's a huge responsibility. And I'm working with humans, right? Like they live, they breathe, they feel, they dream. And if I'm not taking that seriously, I'm just collecting a paycheck, and I'm providing very little value. And the whole point of the human experience, especially when you're interacting with others, is to uplift them and provide value and have them see things in themselves that they may never even thought were possible. And I think that's the beautiful thing about integrating the sciences, and especially, getting better understanding of, the eco-D and skill acquisition side of things. So it's been a humbling journey, and then I still feel like a noob. So it's like, because there's just so many smart people out there, and if I can distill some stuff and make it useful to my people, then ultimately I win. So because my people win.
I think what's interesting to me as I think about my story relative to yours, and I was actually kind of curious about like the date when we first started kind of interacting and kind of the year to kind of frame it, because you mentioned, the context of like Twitter, what it used to be like, to understand, like even for myself, when I started looking into ecological dynamics, actually I wasn't looking into ecological dynamics. I was simply looking into motor learning, because that's what Driveline was talking about, was motor learning, and so I was like, oh, okay, this is the future. Like, let's start looking into stuff. But like, because we have like both of us have the similar background in S&C, because actually that more recently, I think that's how it kind of started up again, is we're commenting on stuff and talking about S&C principles and how they apply to specific baseball issues, which we can get into later. But like my path has kind of been similar, of like, when I got into it, I didn't start with Boyle. I started with Eric Cressy. Eric Cressy
he was there too. Yeah. I got to go meet him too. That was another project, because he was a baseball guy. But but Eric Cressy has been, he's awesome. But just like being able to like spend a week with Mike Boyle is what really made me understand. But yeah, go ahead. Like Eric Cressy is awesome.
So it kind of started with like listening to Eric and how he approached just S&C. And then for him, because like for me, I always knew I wanted to coach baseball, but in Minnesota, I felt like, just like you, right? Where, I didn't get as far as you did, but like my kind of career ended in college, and very quickly. And I was trying to follow everything that people had taught me, and said, and it was just going horribly for me. And so as I was finishing up and I wanted to coach, I'm like, well, I want to give people good stuff. And I felt like the stuff that I had gotten on the skill side of things, not on like the team side, like, cause my experience in college was very good on like the team culture and like what all that looks like in the college experience. But on the baseball side, I was looking for a place where like I'd have a good mentor that would teach me, like how to actually help people. And I just didn't feel like that was the case in Minnesota at the time. And I was starting to like follow Eric and Jeff Cavalier and whatnot. And eventually I saw how much people were going out to Eric's and whatnot in their internships. And there was a culture of learning in the S&C world at that time, back in 2012, 2013. And then also there was a culture of going and doing observations, a culture of internships and all this sort of stuff. And so that's kind of where I kind of got my start, and I kind of started going that direction. And so I ended up, because, of Eric, PRI, and then I started going to different conferences, and like FRC was another one that kind of came in. And I through those internships, I was able to intern at the University of Minnesota because going back to my high school and interning there, it was a U of M strength coach. And so he got me in at the U, and then he was using a lot of triphasic.
Yeah.
And so my story of meeting Charlie, because Charlie had a big influence, at least I thought, like a huge, he asked out of a simple question, changed my whole paradigm. But I was at a conference for one of Cal's. It was a conference that Cal was doing on triphasic, and it was at Mike Ranfone's. Yeah, his facility. So I was out there, and because Mike was also doing FRC, and it was in with Spina, I was asking him like, dude, how do you incorporate like Spina's stuff with triphasic? And I'm asking all these questions of like how to make all this work. And Charlie's sitting over in the corner and just goes, dude, what are you trying to do? I was like, huh? It's like, what adaptation are you trying to go for? I was like, what do you mean? It's like, dude, if you know which adaptation you want to go for, you can pick whatever method you want, as long as it achieves the adaptation that you're looking for. I was like, oh, like that had it shifted me from like one of my favorite quotes is like, methods, there are millions of methods, but principles are few. The one who understands principles can pick his methods. The one who chases methods is sure to run into issues. And so for me, that's where he kind of flipped it for me and gave me the principle. The underlying principle is figure out what adaptation you're going for, and then you can pick whatever method you want. And so that's kind of my Charlie story, that like how he kind of changed my whole career and how I think about pretty much everying, because after
dude's
that,
so smart. It's insane. Yeah. His logic is just too sharp, and it's just, I'm right there with you, man. He and the thing I love about Charlie is he'll ask you questions. And he's like genuinely trying to understand. And like I remember the first time I was like, dude, this guy's scary. Like he's just on another level. He's talking about like Omega Wave and like all the different things that he was doing with that, and like and he was like he was a big West Side guy, but he was like West Side isn't necessarily for everyone at certain times, because you have to pick your spot, because if it gets you what you want, then you did it, but like you don't just do something to do it. And the guy's awesome. Yeah, and Renfone, that guy's really smart too. He's got great hair.
Well, I mean, yeah. And that's where though, like, I mean, because one of the things that I did want to talk to you about is like FRC, especially because they've evolved it. But for me, that was the thing that like again, not to talk bad on people like you were saying before. Actually, I was going to ask you before we started recording this. I'm going to chop this part out here, but calling people out, do you want to go by names, or you just want to talk around people?
We'll just talk around people, because you know what, some of them some may not even be like, they may not be aware of what we're saying. So like, it's whatever.
Sure. But I mean, for me, like seeing what the FRC guys were doing, especially the person who I think he was in Minnesota. He introduced me to him. He's like, hey, you should go check this guy out. He's doing crazy stuff with like something with like mobility and quarters and his big toe. It's just like, and these guys are doing some crazy stuff. And you start looking into it, you're just like, wait, that's breaking everything. Like literally before I went and interned with Cal, I went back out to Cressy and like spent a week out there. And that's when like I realized Mike Boyle is out there. I was like, oh, how many other like really great SNC coaches are out here, and I went and visited Mike Ranfone, and then I can't remember his name. Anyways, it doesn't matter. There's a bunch of other people. So I went and observed a whole bunch of different stuff. So I got to see a lot of different things, to be able to kind of compare and contrast of like Cressy's place, Mike Boyle's place, Champion's Performance. And then I think might be Strength U and I'm trying to remember his name that's up there. But anyways, it doesn't matter. But point is like, got to see all that. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I knew that what Cal was doing was completely contrary and broke all the rules that like I had learned out of my base of like how guys are supposed to move, like anterior pelvic tilt was the devil, and like bending the spine too much or whatever. Like it was all, cause your Cal's doing a whole bunch of like stuff with like basically in like a plank position. I can't remember what it's, what we're working on exactly, but like guys are like in these really like heavily anterior pelvically tilted positions. I'm like, when you go hang out with somebody or you're around somebody for a long time, like they just influence you. So I was like, I don't want to lose my base. I really want my base solid before I go in there. And what was interesting about all that whole experience was that FRC really broke my mind a little bit on like these traditional ways of thinking of how movement is supposed to be and what you can do, right? You talked about like opening up capsular space and all this sort of stuff. Like these are the things they were doing were almost unheard of at the time, as far as like changing ranges of motion and whatever. I mean, because, when I was doing all my warm up stuff and my mobility work, I mean, I did that till the cows came home, and I don't feel like I really changed much of anything. And I felt like, oh, I'm going to have to be doing my clamshells forever for my back pain and whatever. And so it's just one of those things that it's a really, for me, FRC was like Charlie, of just like, hey, here are some of the basic fundamental things of how we need to think about all this stuff. And granted, I didn't go to school for S&C. I just started getting into it rather than going the school route. Because when I was in school, I just thought all the sport exercise science guys were just lazy because they were all athletes. Yeah. I'm like, I know what they're like, So I'm like, that can't be a real major, And, lo and behold, as I'm getting done, I'm like, oh, okay. But anyways, so that for me, like, I'm just kind of curious on like FRC, because like the whole, the reason you get injured is because the load exceeds the capacity of the tissues. And so if you want to prevent injury, you need to build a capacity greater than the load or the demand's going to be. And so because like, it was interesting because like everything that even though it wasn't true, because even Greg, when I went to Cressy Performance, is like, dude, like, just, you may think it's like all the training, but like Tim Collins came in and could do like a one-sided bird dog like day one. Like the dude was a freak when he first walked in. Yeah. But the narrative was like, and kind of still is, it's starting to change more, but the narrative is just, you just need to make him strong. That's like what all strength coaches I ran across. You just got to, especially the young ones, you just got to make them strong. You just got to make them strong. And then I was back interning at Hamlin, and we're sitting in the office with my strength coach and one of the interns who is over at the U. And he's like, what's interesting? The guys who are the best in the weight room usually are not the best athletes.
Yeah, like middle of the pack. Like the best athletes are like middle of the pack in the weight.
Yeah, or the worst one in the right. He doesn't work hard in the weight room. He doesn't move a ton of weight, but yet he's playing every day. And the guy who's freaking just absolutely crushing it, sitting on the bench.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I've seen that in my facility, and I've seen it with some of the pro guys. And I've actually seen some of my pro guys. They'll go to like a major facility, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're not elite strength." And if you tell a big league guy that, they're going to go, oh, well, I'm going to change that. And then what happens? Like skill goes down.
And that's kind of the thing that I think is interesting, because I don't, S&C does have the potential to change a guy's career. No doubt, yeah. Right? But it's the application and the fact that we sat there and it was like, and everybody just kept saying strength, strength, strength. And like there's one modality out there right now that like kind of uses that language because, there's something to it, right? Like what I learned from Boyle and some of the stuff listening to is like all about how to talk to sport coaches, to get them to buy into what you're doing, right? So talk about functional, right? Until all of a sudden the word starts to lose its meaning. And I think that's kind of a similar thing of like everybody has been conditioned to see the value of the strength coach as like strength. I'm here to make your guys stronger because you know what? Going back to the measurement piece, I can measure that and I can show you, because now at this point, it's almost a science. Like after X number of weeks, like I'm pretty sure like I'm going to have better numbers than when we started, and so like all that sort of stuff. And so to me though, that's why I started to exit out of the S&C, because I started to realize this was not the silver bullet that I thought it was. Like, I mean, obviously I was too small when I played and all that sort of stuff, but at the same point, it was not going to overcome my deficiencies as an athlete. Like there were other things. And it was the fact that like, it was once I started getting into like the motor learning stuff, and part of my story is I had to, when I came back from Pitchapalooza, when I was at Pitchapalooza, actually it was through FRC, Stephen Osterser.
Oh,
he
Steven.
was really talking about,
I haven't heard that name forever. That guy's smart.
Right. And they were talking, him and Shivers were talking about dynamical systems and a little bit of EcoD stuff like very, very early on. And so I started looking into that, and then I started going to Pitchapalooza because Steven was talking there. So I was like, oh, I got to go to this because I want to hear him talk. And while I'm there, I meet Eugene Bleecker, and Bleecker is just going on and on about how you have to read Dynamics of Skill Acquisition. And he basically just like berated me like that one evening, and I was like, all right. So I go back like the first night, I go find a PDF copy on the web, and I'm like starting to go through this thing. And I come back, and I was working with Tyler Earby at Inspired Athletics, and as soon as I come back, I'm like, Tyler, what do you know about dynamics of skill acquisition? Start asking him a whole bunch of questions, and he's just kind of like, he gave me some answers or evasive answers or whatever. And then I see Sean's Sport Movement Skill Conference, and I'm like, Tyler, we have to go to this. And I had to convince him a little bit because at that time, Sean was our competition in the because we were working with football players or whatever. And so, but I finally convinced him to go, and like for both Tyler and me, like that was kind of after that it was like, oh, whoa. Like it was a big eye opener for both of us of like what ecological dynamics is. And so like that, I guess, because it made intuitive sense once, Bruce Lee was the one who changed my whole thinking about strength and conditioning. Because before that, my dad was into martial arts, and it was all about technique. And when I learned that Bruce lifted weights, I was like, oh, I need to, because, when weightlifting, because I had actually a chance to lift with Sean when I was in high school. He came and promoted, like, hey, come train with me. And I was like, nah, I'll just focus on my technique, and I'll be able to hit the ball harder, farther, or whatever, and whatnot. And so that was kind of my mentality going through all of it, just how I was brought up. And so, and also it was too macho for me. Like everybody was in the weight room and just all about, how much can I lift? And I was just like, I can't, I'm a small dude. I don't, my brain doesn't work like that. I'm not all about the machismo stuff. And so anyways, with all that, it was interesting to see like kind of how that kind of all looped around, because the function, like the thing that drew me to Bruce was it was all about functionality. And then when I encountered EcoD, I was like, oh, this takes it even further, right? So what Bruce was saying got me into S&C, and then what Bruce was talking about also pulled me right into EcoD, because I just saw the connection right away, like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I've been looking for. So anyways, I'm just curious if you have either one of you thoughts on any of those things.
I can go.
Yeah,
so,
go for it.
So, I mean, yeah, it was really interesting because I was as a baseball guy, I always became really confused, because it's like when I abandoned a technique and I just focused on the pitcher and the timing, I would hit nukes. And I was like, I would try to like recreate that. And it's like, okay, well, my technique, again, because I was explosive at 235, 240 pounds, I'm going to get on top of the ball. And it worked in pro ball because I hit for a pretty high average, and I was just blasting balls to the infield. Well, as soon as I get on base, I clog it. And it's like, I'm not moving. Like, I'm not even probably advancing on dirt ball reads because, I was a catcher. But I also then started to really realize it's like, man, yeah, anticipation is like a really big thing. But if I'm so focused on a technique, what does that do to my anticipation? What does that do to how I'm actually seeing what's happening? And what I started to realize, especially as I started going the EcoD, is that I was becoming too internally processed. And it was just like, okay, I didn't do it right this time, so I gotta go to the batting cage, hit off the tee, get on top of the ball, try to I remember this thing when I was in the Mariners. They had me try to backspin balls off of a low tee. Like, it was just like, whew, and they were just like, I was just hitting like little floaters, and I was like, they were like, oh yeah. I'm like, bro, like, that's what you want? Like, I can do that all day, but you want me to but I got around the 40-man guy because I was in AA in spring training, and I hit the ball well. And so this 40-man guy comes up to me. He's like, hey, Johnson, I heard you can hit a little bit. I'm going to see you drive the ball out of the yard. no clue on how to do it, because like I was programmed this technique, and then like after like 8 swings, he's like, I've seen enough. It just walks off, and then a couple weeks later, my ass is on a flight back to Gaithersburg. So, you know, it was, but going back into the FRC thing, man, like it just adds a whole nother layer. So like, because I love how they're talking about how, and one, they appreciate Thomas Myers. Like, one, that's a huge deal. Because like the coolest thing I ever heard Thomas Myers talk about was how he feels. I think it was Vasilis. It was just like, maybe I might be getting it wrong, but it was like this Italian anatomist. Maybe it was in the 1300s or something like that. And he's chopping muscles like this. And Thomas Myers starts saying we should have created our anatomy charts by slicing along the lines that create rails of movement. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, wait. And then he starts talking about how like muscles like just a pack of hot dogs. It's like strung together. And it just started making so much sense. And then the FRC, they appreciate that. So I immediately was like, okay, they're really appreciating the way people move, but they're also looking at it's like, well, if you have restrictions in this one area and you call to it to do something it's not capable of, it's a very slippery slope. One, you will not, the mechanoreception that you're trying to call on, non-existent. You don't have enough capsular input from that or feedback from that. So you're going to do what the joint allows. And if you try to do something beyond that, there could be some consequences. And I thought it was really fascinating, especially once they started talking, like what sold me on FRC was when they started talking about understanding when you see a dysfunctional joint. It's like, if you see a dysfunctional joint, it's as simple as they lose internal rotation. And I'm like, oh, I see that all the time. And then it's like, like you said, like doing bird dogs and stuff like that. Like, cool, those are good prep exercises. Like, we use them still just because, like, now we use them to a PRI perspective where we try to think about how we're going to actually reciprocate motion. Like, okay, we're going to do a clamshell. We're going to hit the glute, the lateral aspects of it. Well, you need to have the medial aspects of the other leg, which would be the adductor. So getting them to do that, like, sideline hip shift and then to a clamshell. But the thing is people still do it wrong. So going back to EcoD, you can constrain it, and they're like, oh, I can't go as far. It's like, well, that's because that's what you actually have from the hip socket, the hip joint. And what you're actually doing is you're doing lumbar rotation instead. So like, what do you want from this? Like, do you want, hip external rotators to work, or are you just worried about the range of motion? And like, I think this is another aspect of the thing is like, when you get into FRC, they completely changed my mind on stretching, because they're not sitting here saying stretching is a bad thing, but stretching without motor activity is useless, because you have nothing that's going to speak to the system to tell it like, hey, this is actually what I want it to do. And then you become flaccid, like that was, like, and you look at the dynamics of things, we're all fluid. So if you get flaccid and you become this baggy that's too loose, you got no control. So it's, and then they started talking about throwing high kicks, like people do the splits, throw high kicks, but they can't actually high kick, and so and then they started talking about ecological dynamics. And I think they talk more about like dynamical systems theory. But it just, once, I think that really kicked over the silos. It really bridges strength conditioning, because like, they're like, we don't care that you back squat. We don't care that you deadlift. We just want to make sure the people who are doing it are prepared to actually do it. And do you have a fail-safe plan in case they do express some repetition that is not what you consider ideal? So now you're developing this like bulletproof jacket in a sense to your body, because like the load bearing capacity thing. And, and then you start going, like, they got me really interested in my doctorate. I got really into isometrics, and it's just like, man, like, why are we wasting our time slowly loading up a deadlift bar when we could do an isometric and you're already ready to go? And it's just, one, it's going to save you time. Two, the PAP effects are fantastic, and you can compare them into plyometrics, because I think that's a big thing. Is like, we're using plyometrics, do some contrast. It's like, that's great and everything. Contrast has its place, but can we get these guys prepared actually to lift and lift fast? And I think the other thing they started talking about is like, Spina started talking about is like, your brain doesn't know what 500 pounds is. It just knows the effort that it's going to take to lift the weight. And, and then this goes back into like, again, when you get to the ISSM, internal strength model.
Yeah.
And they started talking about those ideas, and it just started like, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, allowing these kids to like take an extra 20 minutes to warm up, and we're just fatiguing them. And it's like, well, if we have this window for to actually handle the strength capacity of things, the more I fatigue them, especially if we use sprints and stuff like that. We time sprints to kind of determine where they are at times. And it's like, if someone's running like a 1.7 one day and the next day they're running a 1.9, it's really easy to say and ask them the questions. Is like, well, how you feeling today? And that goes, but you start looking at inputs, right? Like, okay. And once you start creating the input, you don't need to do anything more than that. And even Huberman talks about that. And I think it's really fascinating where...
By input, do you mean, because this is my interpretation of it, is once the signal is sent, right? So let's say I want more tissue. Well, you have to basically go to the point, you have to send the signal to the body that like, actually I need more tissue. So then basically my understanding is you got to go to fatigue, because if you can do it, the system goes, oh, I got it. Like, why do I need to give you more tissue if I can already do this? Now, I do actually think that's not necessarily always true. Maybe if you want the most tissue growth, because like there are plenty of times where, right, we do submax stuff and we still get hypertrophy. You don't go to complete failure, but there's a reason why the bodybuilders do, right? Because they legitimately are trying to maximize that.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing to me was like, once you send the signal to the tissue that like, hey, we need more, or you need more strength, or we're going to do this again, the signal sent, like basically Spina's whole point was like, why do you got to do more curls? Like, once you sent the signal to the biceps, like, why are you doing more biceps?
Yeah.
Like,
once that thing's on
complete
fire and swollen, like once it's on fire and swollen, it's like, do you really need to create muscle damage? Because
or even too, like to speed, right? Like once the signal is sent, like we're fatigued, we're done, and we capped it. Like, signal sent, need to go faster next time. Yeah. Right. We don't need to do any more sprints, because at that point, right? I mean, we even know this, right, with fatigue of like, okay, once I'm burnt out of all my ATP and creatine and all that's gone, well, now we're in a different energy system. And now we're training something submax, which is not max speed. Yeah. Right. So it's like, why are we wasting our time with this? Plus your injury risk goes up and all this sort of stuff. And you're just like, what are we doing here? Right. If that's your goal, going back to the adaptation piece, if that's the adaptation you're going for, you already sent the signal. Like, the rest of that stuff is just a waste of time. Yeah. So anyways, but that's the whole input system. Sorry, I want to go on this too, because this is the other element is like, from the internal strength model, the thing that was thrown out there is like, we can actually, the big issue is like, everybody is training just the red stuff, all the training is red stuff, the muscle. It's like, well, where are all our injuries happening?
Tendons.
Right. And so it's like, going back to the isometrics, right? Like, that was the thing that was brought up is like, okay, if you really want to train the tendons, you got to be able, you have to funnel more of the force towards the tendons so that you can stimulate the growth there.
And that's where you get to the end ranges, right?
Yes. So anyways, that's where, like, for me, again, like, the part of the reason to want to talk to you is like, how are you integrating all this stuff, right? Because just even for myself, I'm sitting here and going like, okay, I see the potential, but because everything is just a weekend thing, it's like, I can't master a system in a weekend. I don't even know, like, okay, I can see the potential, but like, how does this work? Right. Like there's so much about, this is where EcoD as well as like really informed me of like the importance of, and two, I wanted to get into as well, because you talked about like appreciating the other disciplines, right? Not just being siloed. And David Snowden, who is the founder and creator of Kinevin, he talks about the power of the generalist. In a world of specialists, you need a generalist who understands like things across the board or like, across disciplines and domains, and is able to see the connections so you can actually integrate these things back together. And so I say all that to say is like, how are you integrating it? Especially, for myself, it's like, there's so much nuance, because this is the other thing that Snowden was saying is like, we can only articulate about 10% of what we know. And obviously that's like a complete, guesstimate, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But the main point is like, there's a vast amount that we know that is embodied and only comes up in situ, in the situation. So like, you're not going to think to explain it or to do it or to say it or to teach it until you get into that situation. And so that's where like an apprenticeship, for 2 years, you spend 2 years with a person, how much of the stuff that they don't even know to say or to talk about, but you, through doing it and doing it alongside of them, begin to understand how that system really comes together. That's how I began to understand triphasic. I mean, I had literally interned under 3 different people who were using the system. So I got to see the system used in 3 different ways. And so I have a deeper understanding of that because of the fact that I got to see people, how they were implementing it. So I guess that's why I'm asking this question of like, how are you trying to integrate all these different things from the different modalities to, even Franz Bosch, which I think is different than ecological dynamics. There's overlap for sure. Mm-hmm. And even I think Franz talks more about like, he's really dynamical systems. Like that's his approach to it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how are you integrating all this, all this education that you put together? How is that integrating to how you're working with your athletes?
Well, I will quote Mike Boyle again. There's what you know and what you can implement. And I think this is where I have my own particular skill set that I don't demand from my employees. I think it would be very frustrating for them. And that's why I try to set up the most basic systems possible. And I try to put my brain on a spreadsheet so they can understand and then ask questions. So I guess with the starting off from the deepest layer, I look at PRI as that because they appreciate breathing. And I look at, when we're brought into this earth, God gives us the ability to exist. And the only way that we actually get to exist is through breath. So, and FMS has a great breathing model. I don't know if you've ever gotten into it. It's actually a really super simple course, but you have this Venn diagram where you have biomechanics, biomechanical, and you have psychophysiological. And if you can and so to me, when I see a Venn diagram, I immediately think of EcoD because we're trying to bring people into this functional variability. And if I can get someone at the deepest level to reduce the noise in their system, plasticity goes up, in every word. And then so like and we go back to the motor learning principle, is it primacy and recency? It's like your brain's going to learn best on what it first does and the last thing it does. So I always try to start with that idea in mind. It's like, okay, if I have someone that comes to me and they're like, okay, well, my shoulder feels like crap, and I check it and their internal rotation is doo-doo. Okay, well, I know that when they go to try to drive through the shoulder, they're probably not going to have complete control of the joint. It's dysfunctional. So that's when I pull someone out and I work on them, and I use, whether it be, I start off with some breathing, then I'll go through some RPR just to kind of get the system connected. And this doesn't always work, but it seems to be like, okay, they get a little bit better, and then the next day they're even better. And then the next time I see them, I ask them, like, how's it going? They're like, oh yeah, I forgot about it. And it's like, well, I'm never going to talk to you about it again because mind virus, I don't want to keep it planted. And so like PRI and FRC is kind of like an RPR kind of special skills that I reserve for people. Cause to be honest with you, FRC is like, it's super deep. So is PRI. I mean, RPR is super deep too, even to the point where
PRI, the thing, like, because I went down that rabbit hole, and once I went to somebody, and this is why for me, I stepped away from it. I was talking with somebody like local, and I was talking to them, and they were like, yeah, I've been doing PRI for a long time. And I was talking with somebody else who's been doing it a long time, and they're like, I still don't understand it. I was like, you've been doing this for 15 years and you still don't get it? I was like, I'm out. Like, if you like, you know, if you like, because to me that was where, not that there isn't value there, right? Like, I mean, because how lots of people in the industry were talking about it, it was way too watered down. Like, I mean, the whole, like, it's literally, like you said, it's about reciprocal motion, but everybody got stuck with like, well, because everybody is in this way, so then we got to constantly be in like left side down. And this is where, again, talking about freedom for me, just getting into FRC and just being like, listen, you need to move in all different directions in all different ways all the time. And the more, like, just the whole thing of like, oh, you got to hold yourself a certain way in a certain posture. It's like, no, just don't stay in one posture.
Yeah, you know, posture is like dynamic. It's adaptable. Right.
So, variable. I mean, like, you know, because it used to be like, oh, man, you know, you got these rolled shoulders forward, like, oh, you got to get that low scap, and you got to get that, like, you know, bicep in the right position. It was, you basically gave yourself OCD. You know, like, and so it was just, you know, going back to like what you're saying about like doming yourself up about your positions that you're in and trying to perform, like how domed you get and like how much that affects how you're relating to the environment.
Well, that's why I used it more as like a pain management thing, because I know if I can get someone to feel a little bit better, they're going to express more variability of movement because now they're not working around the pain. So this is where I've actually started removing it because, and I also see it's like so many people coach it wrong, and they're forgetting to understand that there's these reference centers. And I think what a lot of people miss is when like Ron Huruska talks about, hey, look, like the left AIC, BC are your most base patterns, but you can have superimpositions on top of those. That's why you need to screen and do table assessments. So you understand, and you don't automatically go, so like if you see a guy with left internal rotation issue, well, he still is probably going to have a right internal rotation issue, but it might not be on the outset. It might be after you clear the superimposition and you get him back to a left AIC. So this is where it's like, I just follow the trail, and it's like, okay, well, I know if they're lacking left internal rotation, I need to look at a contralateral, you know, lower rib. And I also need to look at a left serratus, because left serratus creates stability for internal rotation as you know, as the arm gets into anterior position. So once you clear that, and if they both function, cool, like great. But the other thing is like, to me, it's just like, okay, it's a realignment. And if I can get people to feel their heels more, like, I was like, hey, like, what do you feel from the ground right now? Like, you feel like more heel strike, and if they're like, yeah, I feel that, I'm like, okay, cool, that's enough. Like, I got them stacked. Now it's like, how do I, and this is where I think FRC nails it, is they're all about reintegrating what you've worked on into something you need. And it's like with a baseball player, it's like, so I had this guy that plays at Salisbury. It was super, super human. This is a great dude, but it's just a lot of mobility. Like, you'd be classified as a loose mover. And the interesting thing is everyone tried to change him. And I'm like, look, they're going to change you because this is what they know. But what you and I both know, because we worked together for 5 years, is you've been loose. Like, your upper body is like your Gumby, bro. Like what do you want? You know, like you want to go back in time and have your mom marry a different guy? Like, what do you want? This is what you got. And so like, he's like, well, after I started changing it, I started getting like this, because they tried to shorten him up and he wasn't removing slack. So what ends up happening is he's going to start driving that front shoulder to try to generate barrel versus, you know, using the elastic nature of your system. And I don't want to say muscle because it's obviously fascia, and muscle just anchors fascia and creates this kind of this suspension, which is really freaking cool. But so I took him through an FRC protocol, but you know, I had to pump his ribs first because his ribs were because I mean, he was stressed out. And that was the other thing, is like, I think that's the beautiful thing about PRI is you can really regulate someone with it if you know what you're doing. It's just compliance because it's weird. I tried to use this with...
By compliance, do you mean like the compliance of the tissue, or do you mean the compliance of the athlete to follow?
The athlete, because it's weird. Because an athlete wants to athlete. They don't like. I had a guy with the San Francisco Giants. He was the starting left fielder. You could look it up. He broke his collarbone running into a wall, and he had a history of back pain. And he kept stretching his hamstrings and really big anterior pelvic tilt. And it's like, I'm not trying to take away the anterior pelvic tilt. I'm just trying to put it in a better position for you so that way you can be yourself and not have to worry about your pain and try to work around pain. And he goes, I'm not doing these old lady exercises. And I'm like, fair enough. Like, we won't do them ever. And then you get other guys. I've worked with a World Series player, and he was like, dude, whatever you tell me, I'll do it. I'll give you my honest feedback. So compliance is different based off of someone's belief system and history. And I think that's something that also needs to be appreciated. But I think what FRC does is, like, I look at PRI as like the base layer, and then FRC is kind of like everything that moves you forward. And we use, like I said, we still use FMS because like Charlie taught me how to break down the FMS. He's like, if you know what you're looking at, like on an inline lunge, you can evaluate a big toe. And I'm like, And he goes, yeah. So like if someone sucks at a split squat because their trail leg, their kickstand won't kickstand, put it up on a rear foot elevator so they don't have to worry about their big toe. And I'm like, huh. Because we always look at like the rear foot elevate as like a pretty big step forward away from a split squat. And, because it's like split squat, reverse lunge, single leg isolation. And, it just made so much sense. And then you start to see overlap between every system, because even FRC starts talking about the importance of irradiation coming from the middle, and PRI talks about that too, because that's called zone of apposition. Then PRI calls it, or FRC calls it, just irradiation from the middle. And then,
did you ever go down the DNS rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious because I feel like that's a connection, even though I didn't. I mean, I briefly touched on it.
DNS with,
I'm just curious.
Yeah, DNS with intra-abdominal pressure, and then you even go into FMS. They start talking about, it's like, hey, look, like Mike Boyle would say, it's like, if you see a bad straight leg raise, it's because you're having a sequencing issue. The core probably isn't doing its job to position the pelvis to create a better acetabular position for the leg to swing. Yes, you could have a tissue extensibility on the backside, but usually, like, and then you go in the PRI, usually if you see some of a flat butt, well, you're going to have some tissue extensibility issue. That's actually because things are tight. And then you see some of the anterior pelvic tilt, they have tightness because there's already length there, and then they try to stretch through the length, they get flaccid, lose motor control, and they can't absorb forces because they're constantly at length. So I think going back, and it's kind of like seeing where people are, and I think a lot of it is intuition, but I think especially the population I work with, so many people are like concerned about symmetry. It's like, well, we're asymmetrical. Like you go and look at anatomical models.
That's something to appreciate from PRI, right? Like,
yeah.
PRI, that's like foundational to like one of their foundational, what's the word I'm looking for? Axioms. What's the thing that presuppositions? Is the fact that we're asymmetrical, right? You got a liver. The liver sits on one side. There's not two livers.
There's a gravitational influence, right. And we're left-brained, is what they say. So there's this constant weave, and I think it's really interesting because PRI, maybe they didn't know they were doing this, but they're really, like, a lot of it's talking about the spiral line. And because you're looking at the way the left AIC functions, it goes from one side of the body and then moves on to the... So
can you explain the spiral line? Mostly because I'm not familiar with, I'm sure we're talking over a lot of people's heads right now because we're just jumping through like multiple different modalities.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's going to be more of a transverse thing. So more of a rotational tissue line.
Oh, is this out of the is this like, out of the fascial slings?
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
spiral line one of the fascial slings?
And it's constantly talked about. So you look at it, and if you go and I don't study this stuff constantly because I think like, once you get to a certain point, like if it gets beyond you, you got to refer out. And it's just like, hey, look, this is beyond me. I'll pause your package, go see someone, and then come back when they kind of give us what's going on.
But I think from the standpoint of like, for me, what I've thought about with that is like, some people may be like, oh, well, it's not worth it to go down the rabbit hole a little bit. And it's like, no, go as far down as you can, because now you have an appreciation for it. You have an idea of what it can do. And then, once you start interacting with people, like what modalities you think will help that person.
Yeah.
At least for me, that's where it's like, okay, I've checked all these different boxes, and I go, I think, if I'm going to refer out, I have a specific idea in mind of where you're going to get the best help.
Yeah. You have a network, right? Like I look at people's mouths. Like I had a kid who high anxiety. He's a baller. He's a freshman. He's touching 88, hitting the ball like 94, and he's 160 pounds. And, but it's like he's so hard on himself, and I go and check him. He's got elevated palate, he's got some narrowed airway, and he's got a tongue tie. Well, I refer him to my airway specialist, and I'll say their name, they're natural dentist associates. So Dr. Kim Bayer and Dr. Jennifer Tipograph. I mean, like if anyone gets the opportunity to come to Montgomery County, Maryland, and they think they have a breathing issue, they're scary. Like they're so smart. Like I'm sitting there talking to them. Like I'm having a talk with one of them about primitive reflexes because I'm interested in that because I think that's also an avenue, like it's neurological and it's inborn. And if these things don't get reintegrated into our system, well, they're going to cause a lot of noise. They're going to cause people focus issues. And you're seeing more and more like I'm neurodiverse. So like you're seeing a lot more people with neurodivergence these days. And it's like, well, the big thing is like, can we quiet the noise? And even with baseball players, I mean, some of these ADHD baseball players are getting written off because coaches don't know how to deal with them. I know a few of them that are in professional baseball, and it's like coaches are their constant complaint is like coaches don't like understand me. I'm like, welcome to the show, man. Like you're getting, and so some of the Pirates said this to me. It's like you're getting your general mechanics to work on like Formula One cars. It doesn't make sense. So going back into like the fascial line. So the way I look at it is anything that is, so I believe if you look at it, he highlights it in blue tissue, and it runs from, I believe, the lateral tissues on the outer leg. So it's like your peroneals, parts of your tibialis muscle. And then it comes up and then it moves into the adductors. And then it comes up to the adductors, goes deep, and then goes on to the other side. Now there's some superficial aspects that create this X pattern. And like, this is what I think actually people are abusing in their skill acquisition work. They're trying to get everyone to run out of space really soon, so they decelerate. And this is something that goes into Franz Bosch, where he talks about the difference between passive and active use of your tissues. And, we should be able to decelerate at many points, because that should be an active approach to our skill or our motion. But now we're seeing people restrict people's range of motion. And it scares me because we start running into passive tissues. Yeah. See that? You have the peroneals, and it runs in the adductors. You have the lateral thigh for your glutes, and you see that cross. Yeah. So, and then, like I said, it goes more superficial as it gets to the rib cage. So you look at this is what a lot of people do, especially when they look at this, are like, okay, well, you have to look at it with the appreciation. It's like, okay, what is our actual human design? Well, we're designed to walk and run, stand. Yeah, we can sit. Yeah, I don't think sitting's bad. I just think we do it too much. Like people are like, oh, sitting's the new smoking. It's like, okay, well, there's people inhaling nicotine and they're not dying. It's just, are you sitting there ripping heaters all day? And it's like, well, you're going to screw your lungs. You're going to get your rat poison in there. But it's like, okay, well, if I take a, small hit of like a nicotine, is that going to kill me? No. If you were to take one hit of a cigarette a day, it probably wouldn't kill you, right? That won't happen because it's addicting, but there's some social aspects to it too. But I think this is a really interesting thing, is because we're constantly trying, and this is where DNS, Brett Winchester, talked about it. It didn't make complete sense, because he's like, you need to look at hitting. It's actually, after disassociation, it's actually ipsilateral. And I was like, well, this doesn't make complete sense. But he's like, hear me out. Your pelvis goes that direction, and then your torso follows. Yeah, certain aspects are going to be contralateral, because that's how you create your stretch. But ultimately, you have to snap back into neutral at contact, because that's where your force is going to be best created at your mid-range, right? But we see people trying to get their shoulders past mid-range through contact. And what we're seeing here is like, okay, they're abusing this idea of a spiral line because they're trying to get everything to rotate. But what I look at, and again, I could be wrong, this is just what I believe. You go and look at all the best hitters at contact, their shoulders in line with their back hip. They're stacked. But yet we have this idea where we have to get the torso through the ball versus it snaps back, and then you get the lead arm extension. So
is that kind of what I see? Like, because when I watch, like, for example, Max Kepler hit bombs off of Trevor Bauer, right? You see that, like, what it looks like to me is a kettlebell swing, right? When you pop the hips at the top of a kettlebell swing, you have that little pelvic movement. Yeah. And because when you do it, it kind of locks into place there. Because even too, right? Like, it was one of these interesting things where I do think it's like a little overblown of like, oh, you got to decel. Like, it is a counter against, like, you just got to spin fast and swing the bat hard. But I think there's a level of, like, that's kind of borne out with, like, guys like Jim Thome. You're like, that dude don't feel like he gets his back hip all the way through the ball. He looks like he, like, kind of he doesn't get his hips all the way through. And you're just like, dude, crush his balls. Yeah. And you start seeing, like, guys being able to do it's more obvious when guys go backside. But I mean, to me, this is where is that kind of what you're talking about? Like the stackness, the snapping back and type of thing, or are you just describing something different?
No. It's exactly what we're talking about, because, everything, because you have to look at compressive issues. And I honestly believe, and I think this is why Stanton has back issues, is because he's so closed off. Once he runs out of rotation, he's got to get into his lower back. And yeah, it may help him keep the ball fair, but he's a good enough athlete. Shouldn't he be able to learn how to actively decelerate? Like, and this is where I think Franz Bosch is beautiful, because he appreciates that the hips lock into place, the pelvis is going to tilt because of that. But, and then you look at it, you start thinking, it's like, okay, well, if structure precedes function, even though it looks different, you go put it on a graph, it could look exactly the same. And this is where biomechanics is huge. But without the contributions of motor control and learning and skill acquisition, it's just numbers, it's just graphs. And I think this has been a really detrimental time in baseball, not only for, like, some of these guys, but, like, okay, well, you don't meet the numbers, so we have to work on the numbers. And it's like, okay, but you have a guy that has like a 3 WAR this year, and he has, like, OPS at around 800. Like, do you really mess with that? Like, or do you challenge him more? Because I think the biomechanical model is really good. Okay. I'm not here to crap on it, because I love biomechanics. I have, like, force plate, all that stuff. But at a certain point, you have to look at it as, like, is this just how someone moves? And if this is how someone moves, do I change it because I think they should be doing something else? Or do I sharpen what they currently do and make it tighter and more efficient So their time pressure window is smaller, and they can operate within a smaller frame. And to me, like going back into the fascia, I think it's like we look at these rails, and what we have to remember is like when you stretch something, even when you stretch a rubber band and release it, it might go forward naturally, but there is no intentions of it going forward. It's just the inertia of things, because it's not like I'm pulling the rubber band back and pushing it past its release. So, and if we're comparing fascia to this elastic quality, then what you do is you stretch it out and then you make your decision and you let it play out. I think with biomechanics, we're trying to take too much control of movement. I think what you do is you use stuff like fascia and Thomas Meyer's work to appreciate how the rails of movement, and even he says, like I said, I think he labels like 7. I could be wrong. It might be more than that. But he says like, these are just examples of them. There is many more rails of movement in this fascial webbing. And it's really fascinating, because then you start saying, okay, well, if that's the case, then I need to be able to consolidate this stuff and find out how many different options I have to be successful. And this goes back in the FRC. It's like, why have one successful way of doing things when you can potentially have infinite successful ways of doing something? And this goes back to, like, I love Rafi Devers. I will not watch another Red Sox game this year because of how they mishandled that guy. Some people are like, he's a baby. I'm like, dude, if they did what they did to him to you, you would go right to HR. You'd be like, dude, this wasn't what you hired me for. You told me I was gonna be a sales rep. Now you're having me clean the toilets. It's like, okay, well, this wasn't my job description. There's obviously a level being a team player, but once you're in the big leagues, first base becomes extremely hard. But like, I look at that guy's variability. It's insane. Like, hitting balls 110 off the shoelaces. Like, there's no technique that teaches that. It's all processing, and it has to do with experience and willingness to explore. And this goes back, and this is why I'm such a big fan of Franz Bosch. Is he said there's three terms that you really need to understand. It's explore, discover, and exploit. You explore what your options are within that given context or representativeness or the scenario, whatever you want to call it. You explore it, and then you start discovering your options. And you say, okay, well, when I feel this, it could be my hands coming down or whatever. It doesn't matter, because that's how someone relates to the context of what they're doing. They're not wrong. Biomechanically, they would be wrong, but to their own perception, that's right. Do I take that from them? No. But it's just like, if someone can be successful in many different ways, and this, I have a hard time when people, like, I think I brought something out with a Bruce Lee quote the other day, and someone's like, oh, well, he's not swinging a bat. And it's like, well, if you're a well-trained martial artist, your sword is a bat. And then you go into like samurai, it's Miyamoto Musashi, and they're like, technique precedes strategy. It's like, no, like, listen to a guy that his life was on the line every time he fought. And he says, strategy is the key, because you're going to face different opponents. And if you can understand what that opponent's trying to do to you, you can combat it with a strategy, which will lead to a particular technique. And that's fine. But techniques are practiced. They're not employed during the game. If you're thinking about your body in game, one, you're not going to flow. I did I think it was like a 20-page paper on the relationship between meditation and flow state. Like, the commonalities here are that meditation requires complete presence. You're completely there. There is no wrong way to meditate, right? You just have to be available. You have to be there. I mean, there's different, you can do an internal and external focus. You can do body scans, you can do breath work, but ultimately what you do is you have to be present in the environment. And Well, what's a prerequisite for flow state? First and foremost, enjoyment. But the other one is complete attention. And so if I'm trying to employ a technique and I'm not completely present, then I'm not really sure what this guy is trying to do to me. And this is where the beauty of scouting reports come in, which I didn't really play much with. I had, we had like stuff on a paper and it said like their ERA and stuff like that. And, but now like you have everything. So the strategy is going to tell us what technique we're going to use. And so I think like there's obviously a place for technique, like, because that is like, in my opinion, that's another way of saying variability within mechanics, like being able to do multiple things. It's like I'm playing this video game. I decided to take a little break off of studying because my wife said, like, you study too much. So I play in this game, Ghost of Tsushima, and you have different stances. Okay, that's it. Okay, so if I get a sinker baller, well, yeah, I might set up with a little more hip hinge to create space because that guy's going to be running balls like this. I might start off with a little more space, but I get a high spin rate guy, I may start taller. It doesn't mean I'm going to employ a different set of mechanics. It just means I may position myself based off of what the pitcher's tendencies are. And with guys throwing 103 mile an hour sinkers, like, do we really have time to think about employing a technique or mechanics, or do we already have to be ready? And this is where I think martial arts is a perfect comparison for baseball, because you're in a mano-a-mano battle, and the entire village is watching. So it's, again, there's a place for everything, but I think what it all comes down to is like, okay, let's go back to the fascia stuff. Like that stuff's cool. It tells you how people can move, but does it mean they're going to move a particular way? And I don't think there's two particular ways people move. I think there's infinite ways people can move. You can have a bad dose of Chinese food and you're inflamed and you can't move the next day. It happens. So it's multifactorial. And I think this is where like kicking over the buckets and the silos becomes it's a difficult way of looking at things, because it gets really messy, right? Like, because you have two different colored paints, you kick over the buckets, you have, a red and a yellow. Well, it's going to make orange. And like, it wasn't either color that you're actually seeing. You have to understand when things mix, it can become very complex. But I think when you're open to things like EcoD, the complexity gets explained, and then you stop worrying about everything and you go, I know they're going to figure it out. And of course, technique's important because I constrain my guys, right? We use CLA because there is an efficient way of doing things. Okay, cool. So like for me, like when I went and hit yesterday, I was trying to hit the outside part of the ball. You know how many people would freak out? Like, it's like, oh, I was trying to get around the ball. I hit 102. Like, is that bad? Like, I'm 39 years old. Like, is that bad? No, that's what worked for me that day. And that wasn't a technique. It was a strategy. I noticed that when I was getting jammed because I wasn't releasing my barrel. Well, if I'm trying to hit the outer part of the ball, I have to let the barrel go. And, this is what I find very interesting when you compare international players compared to American players. I think international players, they kind of just let go. And I watched Shohei Ohtani hit. That dude just lets it fly. Like, he'll live with the bad results because he knows that, if he's, and you look at him, he's mouth nose breathing, just like dude looks like he's just hanging out at the beach. And then you see these like other guys are like, and it's like, dude's just fully present and he trusts his training. And like, I know we got away from the fascia stuff. I'm trying to stay on track, but that doesn't.
No, it's all right. We can meander wherever. Actually, I want to be intentional here. Yeah. And Kyle, jump in. Like, I want to hear your voice for a minute because I haven't in a little bit. So I just want to see, what stood out to you, or like where do you want to explore for a minute here?
You've alluded a couple times, Tommy, to just in that last little section of honestly like perception, right? And information connecting to that. And that's something that's been really transformative for me, even on the pitching side, which is not quite as reactionary as a hitter. But at the same time,
The only difference is that it's a closed skill, right? Like
a little bit. I think that I'm struggling with that. I don't think it's fully closed.
not fully closed. It's more closed.
Yeah. It is, absolutely. I want to acknowledge that. I think I've heard some people say self-paced. I appreciate that a little bit better as opposed to closed, because I think closed can sometimes disconnect you from the world around you a little bit too much, and get you too internally focused.
I can appreciate that.
Even if people aren't necessary, even if somebody who's a true believer in that wouldn't say it that way. But the people who I see, actually, this is a perfect kind of connection point. The people who I hear think it's a closed skill just totally focus on the organism.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to talk about biomechanics. They're going to do a lot of Franz Bosch water bags, but they're never actually going to connect to the world around them and ask themselves, why am I moving the way it is? I think biomechanics is cool, and I'm wrestling between what does that mean? What are some invariants within how people move? And yet at the same time, I can't get beyond this world that the reason we move the way we move is because of the environment, not because of what's going on here. It's this dynamic back and forth and interaction. So I'd be interested because as I was, listening to your other podcast, and as you guys were talking there for an hour, it was absolutely very organism focused. This guy's hip does this and this thing does that. And so I'm going to do this and then we're going to do that. And it's that actually is really helpful. I've seen so many players helped by that. And yet there's this, what you're talking about right now is being fully attuned and present.
Yeah, because I think I operate off.
So I'd just be interested. Yeah. I'd just be interested to, how do you bring in perception, affordances, the environment, what they're connecting to in your training beyond just what the body's doing?
Yeah. So I look at it as an integrative model. So it's there are certain times. So I create a system. It's just so people can understand what I do. And there are times where you focus on the organism, and then you have to expose it to the environment. Now, obviously, I'm limited to the environment I can expose to my athletes because I'm in a cage and I don't have the money to buy a traject. And, it becomes very difficult because now it's okay, well, pick your poison. Do you want a more representative batting practice that we can't simulate because we have a smaller cage, or do you want a machine which has its own decoupling of perception and action as it is? And I think what you have to do is do the best you can. So we have this thing, it's called prep, rev, ignite, maximize, execute. So there's can be 5 sections to your program. So prep and rev is really just hey, let's get the body moving, grease it up. Motion is lotion. Dan John, motion is lotion. So they at least feel comfortable in their body. And then I look from an S&C principle, because I think in batting, we should always be working on going fast or be able to leverage the ground. So those 3 sections, I would say, are the most decoupled, just because I want people to understand, because there's plenty of research on these biomechanical things. The more pressure you can put on your front leg, the faster the bat speed. Okay, well, what is a big issue we see with hitters? Bat speed. Again, there's their own set of issues that we can talk about, because I've actually created a system that takes motor learning, force velocity curve, Gentile's taxonomy to motor learning, or a variation of, it's just a taxonomy that will scale the representativeness of your bat speed training. Because this is my problem with we can go into perception here with bat speed. Well, if a hitter perceives that they're not making solid contact at those high speeds, they're not going to swing as hard as they can. Because number one job of a hitter, you can tell them, hey, look, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But guess what? It's their ego. Are you really are you really willing to swing fast and not find barrel? But then you go into the perceptual researches. It's okay, why don't we increase the size of the target? That way, the affordance to go faster is greater because the room for error is larger. So, there's different ways to scale that. that's how you can, like, we're moving our perception into bat speed. But again, like, and creating the capacity to go fast is really important, especially at a young age, because I honestly believe, like, if you haven't started swinging the bat hard or fast by the time you're like 12 years old, you're pretty screwed. You can obviously improve it, but Greg Rose talks about these windows that are available, and they're usually right around growth spurts or growing periods of the human, because their muscles are more at length. You're not going to get them bigger, so you got to get them faster. They're more tendinous because they're constantly on stretch, so you can put more force into the tendons and their actions to produce, greater myelination. So, when we get into perception, and this is where, like, so a lot of times I'll bend my language and what I talk about to the audience, right? So if someone wants to talk about biomechanics, let's do it. If we want to talk about the integration of everything, let's do it. If we want to talk just EcoD, let's do it. But I think that's my job as a kinesiologist, is to kind of find where someone is on their timeline and plug in what they need. So perception's huge. Like, I've started working on a device that allows for smoother saccades of the eyes. It kind of tells them, like, hey, look, like, if you look at the literature, it says professional athletes, professional hitters have, I believe it's smoother and later saccades. And so their eyes aren't all around. They're literally looking at the adjacent mass and then tracking it over to the point of release. So, taking that information, you can, especially, and it works beautifully for guys that overthink and are too mechanically based, because now you've given them an environment to focus on. And, I think the organism underlying is super important, because we have to understand structure precedes function. In most examples, right? Because there are sometimes it's just people, like, they can't touch their toes, but you ask them to get into a hinge when they hit, lights out. So it's like, I think there's some exceptions. I think there's what they can do when you screen them, and a lot of times that shows up, but sometimes it doesn't, and then you just have to kind of, like, move forward with it. But when you get into perception, I think, like, so I had this guy from Florida State, and guy's a stud. Like, what am I going to teach about his swing? Like, please, like, let's challenge him. Can he deal with variance in the bats? So I started switching off the lights on him. And what I noticed is, when I switched off, so he's a right-handed hitter, when the light was shining on the inside part of the ball, he could rake. But when I shut off the lights on the inside half of the ball and move it to the outer half, I'm sorry. Yeah. When I shut off the lights on the inside part of the ball, he had no idea what to do. And I was like, okay, you have to take what's available to you. And if you're trying to force yourself into hitting the inside part of the ball and you can't see the inside part of the ball, what are you going to do? And he's like, well, I don't know. It's like, you have to learn how to do it the other way. And that's the functional variability we're talking about, because you're going to go get into a field where, the sun's in a different position than your home field, and you're going to have to learn how to manage that. And being aware of it helps. It's like, okay, there's the sun. I need to focus on the outer half of the ball. So now we're talking about focusing on the task cues, right? Because now we're perceptually taking advantage of what's available there and appreciating the environment itself, so we can leverage our perception into coupling that with our actions. At least that's how I see it. And then I think, changing angles, changing shapes of the ball. Again, the major issue I have is the availability to create real representativeness. And so, like, that's where I'm working on building a virtual reality lab, because it's like I'm pulling data from guys hitting off a machine that can't superimpose or visualize a picture over top of that machine, which is easy for me. Maybe it's because of my divergence, but whatever. But it's like, well, if I'm not worried about ball flight here, I'm just worried about how the organism is organizing. I need, at least from a visual representation, give them the appropriate task cues and environmental cues to where they're going to naturally organize as they, closer to what they would on the field. Obviously, it has its flaws. I think everything has its flaws. We can poke holes. We can make Swiss cheese of everything. It's just a matter of like, okay, how do we move the needle closer to what we believe will give us the best information? So going back into the whole perceptual thing, it's just, there's just so much you can do, but there's what you know and what you can implement. So if I had it my way, if I had a traject, oh man, like I don't even know what I would do, because that's not a reality. But if I can, if I can teach people to be creative in their work and you really use visualization, because that's another huge thing that we've seen in research is visualization actually gets you closer to success. It's not as good as real repetition, but it's better than no repetition. And, so the perceptual environment we create, I think it really largely needs to be considered because we're not perceiving ourselves. We shouldn't be perceiving ourselves, right? There's a level of, I'm terrible at saying this word. It's like automaticity or whatever it is. It's like there's
Automaticity.
Automaticity. There you go. I just need to hear someone say it. Automaticity. There's a level of automaticity that like we got to trust ourselves. We got to trust the work that we've done and then just let that stuff take over. And that's the no mind flow. But you can't get into that state if you're internal, because you're not processing the environment. So I agree with you. It's like there's a lot of talk on biomechanics and organism and like, but when I talk to people, a lot of times it's much easier to talk about the organism, because that's like, to people on X, like, oh, I study like 1,000 swings a day. It's like, cool. We've all seen them. Like, it's in a vacuum at this point. Now it's like, are you gonna cherry pick this is why I love like guys like Caleb Abney, because like he'd be like, look, he got a hit, but he didn't do it that way. He didn't do it the way you're talking about. And I think everyone's trying to shoot for ideal, but most circumstances in life are less than ideal, and there's still ways to come out on top. So I think, like, to your point, I think, a lot of, like, I've done podcasts with Patrick, and I started talking about teeth and airway, like there's that. And then there's Chad Longworth, where he's trying to get me to admit that I hate the T, but I said umpires instead, because like I already riled up that crowd. I don't know if you remember that, Garrett, after I wrote a paper, I basically said using a batting T creates hubris, not actual confidence.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Oh, dude, everyone broke out their Tony Gwynn gifs. It was just like throwing in my face. I'm like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. But it's true. It's like, we're not sitting here saying that the T can have its place, just not in my facility.
Well, and if you can actually, because all of it comes back to how are you relating to it? Because for me, here's the thing that I like, a lot of my insights came from spending so much time on the tee, because, I would be in there trying to hit forever because I'm chasing whatever. And guys were like, nah, I'm out,
Yeah.
So you're on your own. So, I just basically hit off the tee a lot. And so eventually what I learned though is like, oh, there's a relationship between where my hands are and all this sort of stuff and the barrel and all this that allows me to like hit the ball well. And if I approach it this way, blah, blah, blah. So like eventually I learned some things, and then I could take all that information once I started to understand a little bit more of like, okay, where's my miss pattern? Now that information of learning like, okay, if I'm underneath the ball, I now know that the relationship of my hands and how my barrel works. Like if I tip the barrel more vertical and I point it more towards the pitcher, some of it too is just thinking about it is like, well, if I'm constantly dumping it, if I start it more this way and I start to move, it'll have, by the time I have moved to where my hand position was, the barrel won't have fallen as far, because it's starting further this way. So it was basically little things like that of like, oh, okay. So then once I started interacting, or like, the last time I hit in a kind of semi-competitive setting in a hit-a-thon for DCTC as a coach, man, like I used a lot of that stuff to actually help me, because I'm terrible. Like I'm terrible. My performance anxiety, all this sort of stuff, like having to learn how to work through all that. And also to like, be able to like my last hit, because I realized in the one before, I was like, I did everything. I did all my things and I still missed the ball. And I was like, you know what? I searched inside. I'm like, eternally, I don't think I actually fully committed to, this and this. And I'm like, okay, next time I'm up, I'm fully committing to getting my barrel tipped forward and like towards the pitcher. And then I hit the best ball because I made sure like I'm getting to that position before we got there and just boom,
Sure.
bam.
Sure.
And so it was like, but I also too, the other thing too, back to what we were talking about before, the thing that I started with was like the ball, because like what I've learned, because this is back to like ecological dynamics of like, I was like, oh, screw mechanics, all this sort of stuff. And like these internal mechanical cues, like, throw that aside, just connect to the target. And man, I still was not having success. So I was like, what the heck? But I'm like, but I've used these like internal cues before and they work, to your point, like they'll work. But now I had it slightly different. I was like, okay, I know sometimes when I throw, like, I keep missing down. Well, if I get my lead arm up more, so I focused on that for like one or two, got it in. And then I was like, all right, but I need to, the primary focus needs to be connecting to my target, That has to stay primary, but I use the secondary thing of like an internal cue and boom, I'm back in the zone. And I only like what I realized in playing with is like really 2 to 3 at most, maybe in the 1 to 3 range of like, I'm focusing on it for the next 1 to 3 pitches. After that, we're just like, we're slowly working away from like actually focusing on it. And even too, I've also learned it's like, it's not even about getting there to the perfect position. Cause that was the thing, right? Before, like everybody's talking about technique and optimal technique and blah, 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 and this and that. And it's like, listen, all you do is you become OCD about the technique. It's like, oh, it wasn't there. And then you're like, man, it doesn't feel right. And then you just get in your dome literally, right? Because it's like that whole thing of, as soon as you take the shot, whether or not you made it, right?
Yeah.
Because you have that feel. Well, because Keith Davids.
Yeah.
Keith Davids in one of his presentations on divers. And also I think it's in the book of Dynamics of Skill Acquisition. They were looking at, giving different, I think, instructional or intentional cues or education where they're educating their intention or attention. When they focused on the technique and having perfect technique jumping off the board into the pool or into their dry pool or their dry work, there were more faults. They faulted more, meaning they would run up and then like just not actually jump.
They biff it.
Versus, yeah. And so basically, right, because in dive, if you don't jump, it's a fault.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, there are more faults when they focused on their technique because they were so sensitive to that information that if it was off just a little bit, done. Right. So it's the same thing, like, because that happens to me whether I'm throwing or I'm hitting. Right. You're like, I'm not in the right position. Dang it. And then all of a sudden now you're no longer connected to the ball. But if you're like, this is back to like, was it Coastal Carolina, the year that they went to the College World Series, and whether they won it or I can't remember. But their big tagline was will over skill. Right. And so like that for me, like helped make that connection of like, oh, my intention, if I let that be primary and I use as secondary my internal cue, my internal cueing, and I just allow myself to get there and close enough, good. We go. And if I focus on my will piece of like that target, and I really hone my focus and my will, more times than not, like you're pretty dang close.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's like, for me, EcoD is all about this relationship. What's my relationship? How am I relating to the world? And then I'm just trying to work that relationship based upon how I understand it, which is the same thing, honestly, right? As you're describing all the different things that you're doing, for the organism, you're just trying to get it a little bit more tuned to get on target.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's exactly how I'm applying an ecological approach is like, okay, this is how all these mechanical things, like Sean and really, because I learned it from Sean, so I'm going to give credit to Sean. Talked a lot about, even though it's in the literature, but I don't know who to cite for it, so I'm just going to cite Sean. But we talked a lot about where a thing lives and breathes. And so for me, I've now come to have a deeper understanding of where mechanics live and breathe and these internal cues. Like they have a spot, they have a usefulness. I couldn't throw it away because going back to performance, I wasn't performing. If I applied it the way that I was intuitively receiving what EcoD was saying, I wasn't getting the success that I needed. But because I understood what EcoD really, really holds as its core tenets of what is really, really important, I knew to keep that primary. And so that's kind of how I kind of came up with like, okay, this is secondary. And I learned kind of how these two kind of interact together and when to focus my attention a little bit more on these secondary things and like kind of put it a little bit more prominent. And then how to keep the focus of attention or like my connection to the environment, like how to work those two things together. So anyways.
Yeah. So that's that. So when going back to the system I use is we have this section called maximize where we have an external environment built. They're just hitting in the mats, but we have its specialties. They'll have different, they have the C1 or they have a C2, a C1 and C0, which means center field 0, 1, and 2. And we do it there so they're not so worried about ball flight. That way they can focus on some biomechanical stuff because biomechanics matters. And so I'll go back, and there's a reason why Latache made a book. I forgot the other author's name. He's like a biomechanical god. It's called Motor Control Biomechanics.
It's not Glazier.
No. It begins with a
Glazier.
V. I have the book upstairs. I don't have it down here, but it's
Latache Progressions in Motor Control or something.
No,
like
it's
that?
called Biomechanics and Motor Control. Okay. So what their thing is you can't separate the two because they still live within the organism. And if you try to separate them, then you're just, we call a siloist, like people are dividing things to understand it, but that's not how organisms work. Everything's integrated. We're in an integrated system, and our ability to be flexible and, especially with our dexterity is what separates us. So to find advantageous ways to do things, like this is the importance of CLA, why we do CLA before we go and challenge it. Because it's like, if I can give someone 15 swings where something clicks with them and they're like, oh, and it's like, all right, let's go challenge it. Let's see how it works. Let's see if you can take that characteristic of your swing that we're trying to make more efficient and see how it works. And after a certain amount of time, if we see that it's not where we should be, then we'll accept the loss and we'll change. But ultimately each time you have to test it. And you have to go through the pain of it. Like a lot of people, and you see this a lot in the big leagues. If something doesn't click right away because they're like, oh, I learn really fast. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, you may learn faster than others, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it today. And if it doesn't work today, does it mean you should throw it out? But they'll constantly search because they're looking for they're looking for the magic bullet. And that's where I think you focus on the organism initially because that's what we have most control of as ourselves. We have control. We should have control of ourselves, but we need to challenge it with the environment. We need to battle test it. It's like we see this a lot, and Sean posts this all the time, like cone drills in football. It's like, okay, cool. Like those cones aren't alive. So the moves you're working on, they might build like a capacity to do these things, but they're decoupled. So you're going to have to learn how to do that when someone's actually trying to hit you. And that's where there needs to be a transition. I think the cone drills are actually S&C. And that's fine because the S&C is the point is to build capacity and, but there needs to be some blending with some representativeness. And that it's a very hard thing to do in S&C, in my opinion, because, if you spend a lot of time doing that, or you also don't have room to do it because you're trying to create whatever you can to obviously keep the doors open, sometimes you're going to have more people than you want in order to achieve that. But I think that's where the coach has to work with the learner and say, hey, like, look, like, can we take what we're doing in the S&C and move it over to the skill acquisition side? And that's where the teamwork happens. But so, yeah, I'm with it with the biomechanics. Like, I think biomechanics is a great thing, but can we, and I think that's the power of CLA. It's like, and I heard someone's like, you need to give someone you need to tell someone the right thing. It's like, or you have them experience the right thing. And like, that's what I was telling you guys is like, my entire playing career, I would try to hit the inside part of the ball. But why am I hitting the ball better now than I did when I was playing? Why am I more consistent off the same machine? And I hit less. It's because I'm willing to explore versus stick to these rigid set of rules in biomechanics. And Cody Bellinger said this a few years ago. He's like, I try to develop different keys to the situation or to how I'm feeling that day. And I work through the keys because what worked yesterday may not work today. And what I took to that pitcher may not work. So I need to make sure I have multiple keys that can get me to where I want to go. I think that was like his MVP season. And
yeah, was that the year that he hit over 300?
Yeah.
And was kind of come back. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that season, especially all the out in front hits that he got. I mean, amazing. But I'm curious about different things on that. But anyways, real quick, is it Mark Latache? Is that who you're?
Yeah, Latache and someone else.
Yeah, it's probably not, because that's why I was wondering if it's like progressions in motor control.
It's biomechanics and motor control.
Okay.
So because I think their objective was to bring the two together and show that there's room for both of them. And because, a lot of the hitting guys out there claim to be biomechanists, I'm like, bro, you have no idea how hard real biomechanics is. I thought I was like good with biomechanics, and then I took a doctoral level biomechanics class, and I was like, no chance. These guys are like, the math is crazy. And not being able to rely on technology and having to make your own charts and tables and do the own math yourself. Bro, I was like, I am not a biomechanist, not at all. It's way too much. It's so easy to throw around that term because it's what people think they're doing. But like, you go into like, was it Anthony Brady from Driveline? Is he with the Phillies now?
I don't know, but yeah, he's no longer there.
That guy was so smart. It was insane.
Yeah, he was. It was good to talk with him.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy, super down to earth. Made talking biomechanics simple, and it was really cool talking with them because they went to Japan, and they noticed a consistent difference between cultural
them and the Dominicans. Right?
Yeah, cultural biomechanics. He noticed that there was a particular. It was probably having to do with all the conditioning of the culture throughout the years, how a lot of the Asian community is more floor based, and they're willing to go to the floor. That's why their deep squats are like fantastic, and their crisscross applesauce is like, I have a physiotherapist I asked a few years ago. It's like, hey Manny, how do you sit like that? He goes, are you Asian? I go, no. He goes, good luck. I'm like, oh man, like why did you have to do me like that? I want to get better. But yeah, so like there's room for everything, and I think it's just the biomechanics just tells us like the efficiency or what could be possible, but it doesn't mean someone isn't going to live on the outskirts of that the standard deviation that we see. And like, I think that's what a lot of, guys that are in the biomechanical field, self-proclaimed, they're not looking at a standard deviation. They're just looking at an average, and they're trying to put people in that average. But, like, you have to understand injury history. You have to understand, a lot of other things that go, like, that's why I think the on-base youth is a pretty cool, simple thing that you can, especially if you implement it into your system. It's like, for onboarding reasons, it's like, okay, well, if we have something that's standard across the board, we can all talk about what we see from that perspective, which allows that teamwork to take place. So there's a bunch of good tools out there. I'm still here. It's asking me if I'm still here. I'm still here.
Oh, weird. Yeah, well, you're the one that's talking, so I mean, you would think you would know.
It's okay.
But Kyle, why don't you jump in again if you got something?
I had something. I think that I was thinking about Michael Harris when you guys were talking various things. And even when who did you bring up that had the MVP season?
Cody Bellinger.
Yeah. Michael Harris has had a terrible season. Like, he was in like the 40 WRC plus, like for the first half of the season. It was like rookie of the year, like signed a decent contract, like a huge contract for the Atlanta Braves. It's like an inside joke because the Braves don't sign anybody to huge contracts. But my point is, he really sucked, and then they raised his hands, and the word on the street is that the new hitting coach had suggested it in spring training, and ever since then he's just been tearing the cover off the ball. And so what tends to happen is we look at that as like, well, there it is, right? We fixed him. It was this one thing, and we inputted this singular factor, and that led to it's almost like a linear equation, right? Like, I plugged in A, we just changed his hands, that clicked, everything else is good. And I'd just be fascinated to hear your thoughts, because some of the threads that we've weaved throughout this is like, I wouldn't be surprised if from a biomechanical standpoint he's moving a little bit different, but also I wouldn't be surprised if like he's just out of his head more because he just changed something. Right. So like his intentions or his cognitions have changed. And if that has changed, then his perception has changed. Right. If he has if he's not just, oh, and I suck, at least I'm trying something new and it was working here. I also wouldn't be surprised if like he just got a couple hits and it just happened to coincide when he changed his hands. And so now all of a sudden he's just more confident. And I think it's a little bit back to what you were talking about. It's like the interwovenness of all of this. I think it makes it supremely challenging at times to know where exactly you're going with a player and what changes to make and why they might work. But it does give you a lot of freedom to explore and not really need to know why something works as much as like, well, it did. So let's just keep exploring together.
Yeah, I think that goes into like what I was talking about with Franz Bosch, because I think like he talks about explore, discover, exploit. And so I think this is really a fun thing of when you constrain the hitter with their own body. So like, we do something called, we call them mid-body bat tips. And it kind of like you were talking about, Gary, is like tipping the bat, but we start their hands here. You literally can't get off a swing from here. So you're going to self-organize and remove slack. So when I start to respond, we talk about deceleration points, the torso will decelerate and then the bat slings off the body. And, we're also I think this is where like, I think part of the benefit of growing up when I did is we didn't have anything. So I was imitating Ken Griffey Jr., Andre Scalaraga, Dante Bichette, anyone that was like I remember Benny Agbayani. I was just imitating everyone I could. And what I didn't realize, and I was also very fortunate. My brother was a Division I pitcher. He's 4 years older than me. So essentially I'm in middle school facing a Division I pitcher, like in the backyard, like what the dog saw. Right. So I think there's something to just exploring without any bias, and this is, I think, also the beauty of guys like Cal Ripken, where everyone's like, oh, he's changing again. It's like, maybe he was exploring in the cage and it led to some sort of confidence. And then when you're confident, you let go and you just play. So this is where I think like trying to achieve the mechanic versus just trying to see what's available is, I think, putting that out to the athlete is really important. It's like, you don't have to do it this way. You don't have to, but I expect that you'll explore and find out where it works. Like I figured something out yesterday with my own hitting, and this is all experiential. I'm not saying it'll work with anyone, but because I was a downhill guy, really early, really inside the ball, the classical BS, it didn't leave me room for exploration, because it's like, hit the inside part of the ball, you'll be all right. Hit the inside ball, hit the ball over second baseman's head, you'll be all right. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, that works, but I'm only hitting singles and I have big boy pop. Like, what am I doing here? And like when I'd black out,
they just believe it'll just come. It'll just randomly, when you focus that way, it opens you up to be able to go pull side, because everybody pulls. Like, it's just, you can just pull on command. Like, it's just,
you just react natural. And but then you're seeing guys take balls on the outer half, like 390 poolside, and you're like, and it's like, okay, are you going to tell them to push the ball the other way? So, but like yesterday I was working, I was like, I'm just going to start my hands here, and I'm literally going to feel like Ricky Henderson. I'm just going to like lean over the plate, so I create space. And like and I'm also seeing some like a lot of things that irritate me with hitting these days, like trying to hold your path, and it's like, okay, if you really understand deceleration mechanics, this lead elbow should never come out unless it's an impromptu move. It's just how you organize, like what a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. will do on a high inside pitch. It's like 1.5 balls in. It's like, okay, well, yeah. But, you look at a lot of these guys, the number, like they keep saying, like hit the ball in front. And I think people misinterpret that as like, get your hands out in front. But Kyle Wagner and I think had gone back and forth a little bit on Twitter on this. He's all about getting the barrel out. So it's like, well, if this arm moves away, the barrel's not coming out. In order for the barrel to come out, that needs to decelerate, and that whips off. And that you have people like trying to limit rotation. And it's like, well, if you have good active deceleration components, meaning we're not running into end range, we're not jamming bones together, we're not pinching stuff, and you have control, then you're going to get everything you want. So like going back to like what I was working on, after that, it was like once I got there, it was literally because I honestly believe once you get to a certain level, you already know how to rotate. Like you're not going to play big boy baseball if you don't know how to rotate. Like, sorry, it's not going to happen. And so getting the barrel out is the main objective. And whatever happens after that doesn't really matter. And like being so strict on the rules, like you have to hit the inside part of the ball, you got to try to backspin's a complete. We're not going to go there.
I'm curious about, we'll do that later.
We can go there. We can go anywhere. But like, if you just look at physics, it's like, yeah, we want backspin to create carry, but if you're intentionally creating backspin, you're gonna.
Doc, Mark Spencer.
Oh yeah. That guy's right? So like, funny. That guy's so funny. I love him.
I mean, the whole thing of top spin line drives. You start thinking about it even from an ecological perspective. You're like, dude, everybody's been talking about backspin. And I remember once like looking into golf for like torque because I wanted to understand like moment of inertia and like, all that sort of stuff. And I remember watching a video and they're basically talking like, yeah, if I want to hit the ball really high up in the air so that it lands and doesn't roll, I want to hit with a ton of backspin.
Yeah.
I want more backspin. And it's just like, so wait, this whole thing of like, the whole theory was you want backspin so it goes farther. And my understanding from golf is the more backspin means the higher it goes. So if I want to hit a pop-up, I want to backspin the crap out of that thing. And when you start looking, like, because I remember when I first got to DCTC,
it's just Magnus effect, right?
I mean, explain that. I mean,
so Magnus effect is you create when you have more spin, the ball tends to float up. It tends to levitate.
Fights gravity.
Yeah,
more,
exactly.
Right? Fights gravity more. Yeah.
But that's why it's going to go further. But like, I mean, that's where I'm just like, further straight up, because I remember watching like we had this big, I think he was Puerto Rican. This big Puerto Rican kid. And like, man, he was a kid because, all those Puerto Ricans, because of the academies, they all teach him to swing down.
Yeah.
And man, he would take a big hack and you would think the ball would explode off his bat and just go flying out. No, the thing would balloon up and you're just like, is it going to make it?
Yeah, just
like
can't.
Sometimes it wouldn't make it. And other times it would just barely float over the fence. It won't explode off the bat and just like go bam and just fly out of the park.
Like the Pete Alonso home runs.
Right. And so you're just like, that makes more sense of why it was like dude's just backspinning the crap out of it. And sometimes, either the wind's there or he got enough of it, but it didn't look like it looked like you expected more to come off the bat than what actually did.
Yeah, that was me.
And so
that was me. But when I got one, it was cool. But yeah, so I mean, and there's a reason why they shape the clubs the way they do. And because it inherently will do it for you. And that's something we got, like, a lot of these guys aren't understanding. And when you start really getting the skill acquisition, you start understanding that the elite athletes will succeed in spite of their training. They always will, every time. I mean, like Mike Trout says he feels his hands go down. No chance. Like, never. His hands stay here, and it's just side bend, tilt, barrel release. And that's the really cool thing, is once you start understanding vertical bat angles, getting loft is all about just releasing the barrel, because the barrel now swings in. It's like we don't have to manufacture our plane.
So what do you mean by release? Because, like, I guess once I got into Eco D, I got less, because I used to feel the pressure of, like, I need to know everything. And then you're just like, yeah, absolutely.
I have like 30 of them. So hold on.
While you're doing that, I'll fill the space. Like, I used to just have so much anxiety of, like, I need to know everything, and I don't feel like I really understand it to the level I want, and this and that. And so, I don't know, Eco D gave me the freedom of, like, actually, I don't need to know everything.
Yeah.
You know, if I set things up and I give them the correct intentions, they're just going to naturally self-organize, or we're going to explore around until we find it. But I mean, here's where I want to go with this before you demonstrate. The reason why I think learning this is important, if you can understand it, right? Like, I'm not hunting this like as ravenously as I used to, but, like, I'm open to, like, learning it, but I don't have to, like, feel like I need to learn it all now. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to help guys. I feel like where all this fits and sits is, like, when I'm helping a guy, I can help him search. You know, I can point him to where to search. I'm like, I think this might help. Let's search here. Let's search in this area and see if we can find something that's going to work for you. Like, to me, it's just going to help, eliminate, because you could search anywhere. You could go with your feet. You could go with your hands. You could go with your pelvis. You could so many things. But, like, having a better understanding of this, like, helps you go, you know what? Let's do our search here.
Yeah.
So anyways,
yeah.
I
1,000% agree, because I think that's the beauty of CLA, because it's like, okay, like, we're leveraging blast, we're leveraging K motion, we're leveraging the force plate. Now, instead of dictating what people do, we give them a constraint and we let them figure out for themselves, because at this point, like, you can test the constraint to see if it produces, like, better attack angle, better VBA, because, like, if you use a tap ball, like, if you want to keep that tap ball in there, well, that lead arm has to stay close, and then you'll get better attack angle. We see it every time. So when we talk about tilt and loft angle, so, like, if I'm hitting and I'm more upright, well, now my release is more horizontal. So if I'm trying to get my side bend and get my vertical angles and I decelerate, well, my barrel is going to release more in the plane, but I'm also going to catch it with better loft angle. So by constraining the lead arm, you're going to eliminate that wing feel, and now the barrel is not going to get out. Now I'm hitting it too square rather than, releasing and getting under it. And I think this is what, like, when you see Mike Trout at his best, it's just that, and he just scoops stuff up. But, and DK Willardson, have you ever looked into his book? Quantitative Hitting? Fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
But now the MLB is...
And the Quant T?
Yeah.
Right?
I had one. I have one. I used it like 3 times because I had one kid use it, and he actually hit the tee and bent it. Yeah. And I'm like, this is like $500. Yep. Like, I can't do this. So then it just collects dust. But I think it was worth the money, because it allowed me to understand, because it itself is a constraint, just a very low representative constraint. So it is CLA. It's beautiful, and it creates the appropriate angles that you need. And this guy did a ton of work, and a lot of people, I think, aren't citing him like they should, because he was the only guy I ever heard that was talking about VBA. And you start looking at guys like Freddie Freeman, Mike Trout, Joey Votto, all these guys that have really low infield pop-up rates. Guys like Freddie Freeman, not the highest bat speed anymore, but he still hits his 20 to 25 to 30 every year. And, like, no one hits with more tilt than him. It's incredible. Mm-hmm. So it's like...
So, okay, on that question, right? Because this is where, for me, when I start hearing stats and, like, my Eco D brain goes, yeah, okay, that's cool, but is this for everybody? Like, to me, this is contextual, right? Like, what works, based upon their intrinsic dynamics.
Yeah.
Like, how is this really for everybody? Should everybody try to swing like Freddie Freeman and Mike Trout?
Nope.
Right. So, like explain to me, like, how do you determine, what angles are right for which guys? You know what I mean? To like, how do you start to manipulate this? Because initially, what everybody's going to try to do when they first hear this, right? And it's totally normal, because if you think about the stages of learning, with like, for me, it was really obvious with kids. What do? How do I want to teach them how to speak? I need to identify things and just point like, okay, this is an apple. This is whatever, right? And then initially the child, all it does is repeat. Okay. So I don't fault anybody for, after they interact with something, the first thing they're going to do is just repeat. They're not going to, generally speaking, go deeper.
Yeah.
They're just going to go on repeat. So like, to me, the feel is like, okay, you keep telling me over and over that like more VBA is better. But is that true? Like, because that's all of a sudden we start chasing this thing, and all of a sudden, like, it will work great for the bell curve. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, you get your really high responders, but the guys that are in the bottom half of the bell curve, like, sorry, you're kind of SOL. So like, this is where I guess I'm going, is like, how do we have a deeper appreciation for this, instead of just being like more VBA good, and less bad.
Well,
like,
I don't think it's necessarily more, because if you get a guy that's horizontal,
right,
and that can elevate the ball, then you're probably not even going to look that way anyways. Because if they're already hitting the ball for power, and they're driving the ball to the outfield at a consistent rate, then you probably won't even mess with it. But if you start to notice that we're getting a lot of backspin and those floaty balls, that it's like, and this is where you CLA it, and then you expose it to a higher contextual environment and say, hey, look, like, your VBA is going to be different at varying locations.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing to me, is like, even like now, because I haven't really dove in, and I was hoping to find somebody who actually, maybe we'll do that in the future, is find somebody who's really dove into like the new bat tracking stuff, because I think they really are starting to track, like, they're putting out the data of like, it's tracked, it's got the whole swing arc, it's got all this stuff, right? Like, that I think is where the next level of analysis needs to go. But I don't, Kyle's, got a book on R, and I have not yet really dove into R to like really pull data myself and really try to recreate it and ask a bunch of questions. But I see the potential there of, like, okay, you're taking this amalgamation and all you're spitting out is like, oh, we're looking at averages. Okay, that doesn't tell me what it is on a high and inside pitch. You're just showing me one ideal pitch where he absolutely crushed the ball.
That's where DK Wilderson nails it, because he actually puts out a strike zone. And he's saying like, here's your variance for these different pitch locations. And so what he was saying is that the more inside you would get, the greater the VBA need. The higher the elevation of the pitch, the less VBA. The more outside, the less VBA. So like, if this is a strike zone here, their coverage would look more like that. And you look at guys like Freddie Freeman that cover a lot of the plate really well. He can get flat. He can get angled. And this is where variability and having good movement diversification pays off, and not trying to practice the technique. It's like, go battle test it. And if you battle test it, and this is where it's like, I don't like to tell people what they should experience. So it's like, when I'm a coach, I really try to act as a Sherpa. I'm just taking you up the mountain. I'm taking you what I feel is going to be the best view. But ultimately, it's going to be your experience and how you interpret what we're doing. And if you think like, it's like, oh, I'm hitting the ball better, I feel more hands. It's like, use more hands. Hey, I feel like I'm riding my backside more. Ride your backside. Like, that's for the athlete to discover and exploit. So I think like, once you start putting like, and so we've tested a lot of the drills that we do, because we do some prescriptive stuff, because I think there's something there. But ultimately, when you get into your challenge and like, you're really like looking at ball contact, it needs to be difficult and really needs to be representative. And what I've seen is, if you can, and this is where I think FRC fits perfectly into hitting, because now you can train variability. within the system and then integrate it. So you get guys that don't side bend well. Okay, well, their VBA is probably going to be trash. So you're going to get guys that look more like Juan Soto or Trey Turner, which they're successful in their own ways, but they're also those guys. And that's to say is like if someone's already hitting well, then it's more about challenging them and making hitting interesting than it is just feeding them balls. So I think it's one, does what you're doing really does it really do what you say it's going to do for that person? And that's where like you use things like blast motion, which has its own set of issues, but it's an affordable sensor that is going to do better than, just using your eyes. So like, but if you can take like a trail arm connection ball drill and your connection improves, well, that the bat's going to ride the body. Now, if you can look at something like K motion. Does this person hold their hinge well? Because if they can hold their hinge or they can get hinged and they can stay connected, their VBA should be there. So if your connection's at 90 and then you side bend or forward bend turns into side bend and you hold that angle, well, that's going to dictate what your VBA is. And if you have good deceleration patterns, because I use water bags for that because there's a lot of feedback and like you can feel the water slam, and you don't feel the water slam unless you decelerate. But that by itself cannot integrate. It's not specific enough. So it's like you have to take, like what we do is we take a water bag and then some sort of constraint, and then we let them like use the water bag to move into their constraints to develop that tighter variability within their biomechanics, not necessarily with how they approach a different pitch. Like the pitch is going to tell you what to do. But if we can make them more efficient under more variability of the ball, efficient, whatever that means, right? I think you just have to look at result. But if you can do that and let them explore it, then they really come to their own conclusion that this is like, hey, this is like weird. Like I have a guy I'm working with who's with the Blue Jays right now, and like he sent me this picture of this video of him hitting, and his hands are like this, and he's like, yeah, I'm rolling over everything, I'm spinning off. It's like, yeah, you have to put a connection ball there. He can pull side elevation on everything. And he's like, it feels really weird, but the results are good. I'm like, well, weird just means could be doing something different, which means you haven't adapted to it. You haven't learned it. So you need to do it regularly.
Wait, but it doesn't fit his motor preference.
Oh, dude, don't get me started there.
I mean, but like, seriously, like this is what some of the stuff of like, there's like with all things, right? There's
Can I tell you something real quick?
It's not.
I had a kid that got motor preference because of his neck, and he started doing what they told him to do, and he had neck pain afterwards. I'm like, is that really your preference if it causes pain? And like I had another kid that must
not have studied enough. Must have done it wrong or not studied enough to know that in depth how it works.
Snap Lotus power package, but again, I think there is some validity there, but it's too narrow.
Right. Yep. For sure.
It's too narrow because life is not black and white. And what happens if someone gets injured? And my other question for someone who what if they have some developmental issues? Like you have a hitter, like a lot of people like I had my son checked with an OT. Well, he has some reflexes that need to be integrated. What happens after I train that? Because they talk about that being inborn, but that's what we were given at birth. It's like, well, one, FRC exists. You should study that. Two, it's really easy to say, well, this is what, and also their tests are really passive. Like they push on your spine.
For sure.
And it's like,
that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I will check passive range of motion too, but can they control their pelvis? Because if they can, then let's just move on. I've had other kids do it. They told them to get like here and they couldn't hit. And as soon as they like widened out, they start mashing. So it's like, how about you just...
My challenge is just that they become the thing that they criticize, right? What are they criticizing? There
Silos.
isn't one way to move.
Yeah.
Right. They're criticizing that like the one size fits all. Except, of course, for that person once you find it and unlock it.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, they sort of become the very thing that they're criticizing, which is that there is a right mechanical model. It's like, no, it's not, except for that guy.
My old
and we'll
strength
help you
coach
find
said
it.
the same thing. He's the one of the skill acquisition guys for the Diamondbacks. There are valid points to motor preferences, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And I think, like Kyle, what you're saying is it became what they were trying to avoid. And I have an associate of mine who is my strength coach at Marshall, who actually, I still think he's the head of skill acquisition with the Diamondbacks. And he had the same very issue. It's just like, well, you say that you're not trying to bucket people, but you're giving two options per whatever you're looking at. That means there's buckets, and like you're putting them in one or the other. And, it's kind of contradicting where it will work for some people, right? Like, but to say that you can't develop movement, it's like, then why do we even have physical therapy? Like, why do we have OTs? Why do we have occupational therapists? Because, like, my son was, still doesn't have some of his reflexes integrated, but they can integrate. So that's going to change the way he moves and operates. And why is it when I expand someone's capsule and teach them how to use it, they can get layback? Why is it that they can side bend better once we, teach them how to move their spines? I think it's more complicated than what they make it. But, we're trying to create almost like a TV dinner for people. We're just trying to prepackage it and be like, here you go.
But
Eat.
certainly the challenge, unfortunately, even further is if they were to hear this, they would say, well, you got to take our course and we'll tell you how this person is right toed and, lat dominant and, rotationally left side eared. And like, they'll go down the rabbit hole and tell you it's actually not super simple. You're just applying it wrongly. And sometimes I have a fear of those things as well. It's like, there's this sense in which there does need to be an incredible deep well of like complexity in something that you're studying. I think that we even see that within ecological dynamics and skill acquisition. And yet also it needs to be on the side of simplicity too.
Yeah.
And you kind of can't have both. You can't say it's super simple. And then when somebody pokes a hole in it, you go, well, you just don't understand it. You haven't studied it deep enough. It's like, well, maybe, but maybe not, maybe there's just something that isn't quite as clear as you're saying it, or isn't simple, or doesn't require us to pay thousands of dollars to learn your system,
Well, I was going through Franz Bosch's book, Running, and he talks about it's about the options that the system has. And if you can't perceive your options because you've never explored them, then you don't even know they're available. So this is the whole thing called mechanoreception, right? So like if you don't explore your mechanoreceptors or you don't expand the capsule, which is your primary mechanoreceptor, well, of course you're going to move that way because you have no other option. It's like, hot dogs and hamburgers. That's all that exists until you bring in the steak or the shrimp. And, I appreciate it because it's giving maybe people who don't have as much of a background in it an opportunity to have an impact. But I also think it's just as easy to buy $100 textbook, anything that's Keith David's, and like, honestly, I'm a firm believer. If you go deeper with Franz Bosch, he talks a lot about movement diversity and variability as long as you maintain the 4-bar system. Again, I'm not necessarily agreeing with all their biomechanics, but the fact they're still talking about exploration and they compare the differences between these javelin throwers. And it's like, both these guys are extremely successful, but are they getting stable? Are they removing slack? And it might look different, but if they both have a high level of functionality to the true word of function, like you're actually successful in what you're doing, then why does it matter? And I think this is where creating environments, like what you were talking about, Kyle, is like perceiving the environments because they create a perception of affordance. It's, like if I'm trying to take the same way I hit an inside pitch, same way I hit an outside pitch. Well, I need to learn my abilities to hit the outside pitch different ways, because they're going to come in at different angles. They're coming at different speeds. Like this is what this is why I'm so fond of things like EcoD, because it's literally like explore the gambit of things and figure out what works for that person, and can you apply context to it? Because if you can, then it's going to be truer and more authentic in nature. So again, it's not to talk bad, because those people, I respect them for putting together something. I mean, I haven't.
It's not easy, and I think, from my understanding, they did a bunch of research. And so this is where I sit on is like, look, if you can help athletes, right? Because the creator of a system may understand, going back to like, you can only articulate a small percentage of what you actually know. How this person actually works with athletes, man, they could get great results. Like, I took Eldoa. I don't know if you've done, right?
Fascial stretching,
Guy, I'm sure. Yeah, Guy, right? That dude could probably, like, I mean, he was working with like Houston Street or whatever, right? And like, and he was like, finding all these different things because he understood, right? That dude knew anatomy inside and out from like dissections and this and that. So he understood the connections, and like he was saying, okay, this and that, like, and so you're like, all right, right? But like me taking Eldoa courses, like I can't redo, like I'm not Guy, right? I don't have that wealth of experience. And so in the same way that I like, there's the biggest challenge, right, overall with all these sort of things, right? As I've even thought about it with like, okay, how do I want to get EcoD out there, and I want like even, I know this is the same desire that Emergence has in Sean and Tyler. How do we keep the quality high? Not just like put out stuff so like a bunch of people know stuff, and then how they utilize it kind of is a bastardization of these things, like so that it muddies the waters. Like, how do we transmit things at a high level? There's no replacing, in my opinion, the apprenticeships. Like there like in some ways, like that experience, like it is the main way. Obviously there's people like Kyle, like yourself, right? Like, I mean, you've done a pseudo kind of like distance, like there's this distance interaction that's consistent, but like, I mean, you're jumping in and you're interacting with it, but you're having this mechanism where somebody's checking you and pulling you back towards like it, holding you to like these are what the principles are. And for most of us, we don't have that. You know what I mean? Except in these like, I'm a GA, I'm an assistant coach, and whoever I'm underneath is the one that's mentoring me. But like aside from those things, like I think it's really hard to really achieve the level of those guys that create those systems. In some ways, like, cause like, I mean, obviously Ranfone is different, right? All the guys that like, but they went really deep down the rabbit hole, like Dewey and Hunter and whatever. But Hunter also, like, he had crazy mobility before he even started doing FRC. But you know what I mean? Like those guys, they're at a different level. You know what I mean? And it takes time to get there. Like you really, really got to be persistent. And I think a lot of us just don't have, we're not at that level. So I think I just wonder, like, so that's me giving them grace, I guess you could say, is like, the guys that are the main guys, like, yeah, maybe they do great, but I don't, the application that I see from a lot of people who come from that just leaves me feeling like, man, there's a bunch left there's something missing here. There's some disconnect as far as like what I'm seeing from the fruit of it, so to speak. Yeah.
I also feel like some of the ambassadors they tried to get on social media to talk about it, it's like, they don't know much about the human organism, because most baseball guys don't. And then it's like, okay, well, you get around guys that really are deep in the rabbit holes. And like, I've taken almost every course, PRI, FRC, DNS, at least the ones that I can take. Every RPR, it's because it's like there's this curiosity, but not every coach is curious that way. And I think what it ultimately needs to become distilled down to is, can we, how do I say it? I always say hide the pill in the pudding. It's like, can we get the most pertinent information into something that is easily digestible? It's like like if you talk to someone about like, okay, well, you want your, like for pitchers, you want more layback. Here's some checkpoints. Can you spinal extend? Can you actually actively externally rotate your arm? Well, those are your biomechanical checkpoints. And then you start putting them in positions. And I think this is where Driveline's done a really good job of coming up with variations of throwing that check them and say, hey, look, well, you're not getting to this point in your throwing, and we're exposing it through like, people holding balls like this. And now they have to get in position better, or you use CLA. And I think what needs to be tested is, because I don't think we're ever going to get people to get fully the full understanding, or maybe to the level that we're trying to get at in terms of our knowledge, because we're curious, is can we validate these things through good testing, like without bias? So like my doctoral dissertation was on, okay, I tested the PRI principle of isometrically activating a hamstring, because what their claim is that it gets you into better stance position. Well, they're right. The effect size was small, but it's because it was an acute intervention. But if it has statistical significance, even at a small effect size, we still need to test it for a chronic intervention and see what is like, how will this do when there's actual motor learning involved. And that, and coupled with maybe, a surface challenge that teaches someone to effectively get to their front leg. So I think it's like combining biomechanics, CLA, and the principles of ECOD, and being able to have some measures that say, hey, look, yeah, like for some people, this moves the needle. And, the issue is always going to be the bell curve, because there's always going to be some, even like in textbooks or even in classes, there's going to be the exceptions to the rules. And I think most systems won't admit. This is another thing I liked about FRC is he's like, well, if you have a real impingement, there's nothing we can do about it. Like you probably got to get surgery if you want that range of motion back. Now we can work with it. We can prevent pain, but it doesn't mean you're going to be able to move the way that you want to move. And, I think addressing that, and this is where I think the best studies have really good discussions on their limitations. And whereas most people will pick through abstracts, I mean, you're trying to write a quick article, sure. But like for me, I'm going to go look at the references. I'm going to go look at the limitations to the studies, because now I understand the population of whom we're working with, and it's going to give me better insight. So if I like, oh, well, this article's on middle schoolers. Well, I'm training, it's female middle schoolers. Well, I'm training, minor league baseball players who are male. There's a skill and age level difference and gender difference that could have impacts on the variability. And also, like, I think in a lot of articles, and especially when you're doing independent research, you can't control confounding variables, like people working out before you test them. I mean, they did that with me at the Mariners, or like they had me do a step up test right after I caught bullpens. You think I passed that step test? And then I had to come in at 6 o'clock every morning for a week because I was out of shape, or was I fatigued because I was out in the Arizona heat catching 6 bullpens? And like, I think this is the issue. And I think most organizations won't say that there is a limitation to what is possible based off of populations. There might be disclaimers. It's like, well, if you have injury, blah, 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 blah. But like, I think as someone who creates a product, you want to make sure everyone's trying to make sure that everyone can use it. And like, there's other constraints I won't talk about, but just like Garrett, you probably know the one I'm talking about. I always talk about the move, the scissor.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But
hurts my feelings.
Sure, so I get it. I mean, there's lots of stuff, but here's what I will say on like the whole thing that I said before of like the ideal. But I do feel like the stuff that Emergence and other people, Rob Gray and the Constraints Collective and et cetera, whatever, and whether it's Baker or yourself, Kyle, and same thing, Tommy, like enough of these ideas are out there, and I can already tell that they're influencing people, and people don't even need to do it perfect to get the benefit. You know what I mean? And so like, that's where it's the landscape has changed enough that people can appreciate what we're doing, you know? And for me, I think that's just like something that's really helpful, because then I go into a space, I get less resistance, and we can start working a lot quicker. Yeah. And so, you know, I don't think it's realistic to expect everybody to, you know, that you're going to really be able to keep high fidelity forever. That's not, but it's more about like, because this was my experience comparing facilities. There was a difference between interns between certain facilities. One set could really articulate lots of different ideas, and you could like go on a lot of different directions. And they were also trained to be able to handle a lot of, you know, how to handle awkward situations. And the other group, when I had conversations with them, man, they could only tell you about the program that they were running. Anything that was outside of that, they could not explain it. And I actually think they were a bunch of bright guys, but because of the fact that they only ever ran their program, they kind of got dumb because of that. And so like, that's my excuse for why I think I got what I got. Cause when I interacted with them, it was at the end of their internship. And so that's what I'm going to say for that. But like, I noticed that with like, I'm always leery of the not founder guy. You know what I mean? Who's teaching a course or whatever. I'm like, man, you are just the guy who drank all the Kool-Aid. And I don't know that when you start poking that guy, that he can actually give you a true answer, because he only knows the answers that he's been given.
They're just regurgitating.
So like, 100%. Right. And we don't know what constraints were surrounding that guy as to why they drank that Kool-Aid at set. I mean, there's lots of coaches who are the spokesperson for a certain thing, and then you go look at their team and like, they're terrible. They don't hit, they don't pitch, they don't do the thing that they were supposed to do, or they were really good before. You know, like there was one company who posted, hey, the X amount of softball teams in the World Series this year uses our system. And I went and just looked up at like a few of them, and like there's like 75 or 80% of the teams in the World Series had been there like every year before. It's like, well, I don't think it's your system, dude. Like I think they're just trying to stay on the edge, you know?
Yeah. You know? Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I do
think that I think the data validation is important. And I know Rob's talked about that a lot. Like, how can we continue to show that these ideas are good? And I think there's an important subset of the population where that'll be important for. I think the two things that give me more and more confidence of the ecological framework certainly are whatever the old idea was, you know, information processing, mental models, whatever that was. When we compare them in studies, you know, the ecological approach, differential learning, constraint-led approach, it outperforms them every single time. Every single time. And so that gives me confidence in that way. The other thing I'll say that I think really resonated with me, Tommy, is when you said, well, we're going to have to hit balls that are inside versus outside differently. I think those types of practical examples are really, really key to connect with the greater population about why this is useful. But then you said something, you went a step further, and I love this. You said, and we will have to figure out how to hit that ball that's away in different ways. And I think the thing that I love about the ecological framework is when you have a system and they tell you this is a certain way to do it and this is how to get the output, it will end at some point, right? Like, you will master the system, you will move in the correct way that they tell you to, and there will be nowhere else to go, and you will fail, and there will be no answer for that system. Whereas the ecological framework does exactly what you said, Tommy. It says, well, can I hit the outside pitch in different ways? That will never end. It will never end for my pitchers to explore new and novel ways to make pitches move, to get guys out in new and unique ways. That will never end. Our pitch design will never end, because we can always think about different ways to tinker with pitches in order to get guys out in different ways based on what's being presented to them. And that's something that I think is really powerful about the ecological framework.
Yeah. I think, and that's part of the reason why I think pitching's ahead, like so far ahead right now, is that they're trying to come up with more problems, because they know that hitters are not coming up with solutions to the problems. Because if something doesn't, so like we're trying to hit an outside pitch by staying inside of it, it will work until it doesn't. But then when it doesn't work, they fall back to the biomechanical model and try to completely overhaul their movement. And it's like, well, you have to perceive to act. And if you don't perceive something as an affordance, well, you need to focus on that, go through the pain of trying to figure out what works for you, or just, the collection of experience to let your body, self-organize is hugely important. But so many people want the answer. And the answer, like in, you look in religion, you look in like whatever, they always say the answer lives within you. Everything comes from within. And if I'm solely taking someone else's words and saying, hey, look, you need to try to hit this ball the other way, and then I can't do it, then I suck. Versus like, hey, look, I'm just going to explore and see what works. And if it works, I'll try to challenge it more and see if it still works. And if not, I come up with another solution, right? Or just another way to get the job done. I think that's what it comes down to, is not worrying about perfection, but worrying more about performance. Like a top, like we were talking about top spun singles. Well, guess what? Chris Bryant was a pretty good hitter. And if he would have stayed healthy, he'd probably be a Hall of Famer. The guy would hit top spun singles all day. And to like what Mark Spencer says is, if you top spin a ball to the outfield, no one's catching it. It's falling in every time.
If you do it into the gap and you hit it hard enough, that thing's going to split the gap.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Or you do it to the corner, right? Like this is because I was thinking about this with like our best hitter top spins a ton of balls. And he keeps talking about, I need to stop doing it. No, dude. Like, stop. Like, please don't change a thing. Like, I don't think it will change, partially because his swing path kind of is what creates the top spin anyways. Yeah. But the thing is like what I noticed is like, okay, if you top spin it over the third baseman to the corner, think about it. If you backspun it and you backspin it enough, it balloons up there.
And it'll skip also.
Sure. Well, I mean, because like the thing is like you start thinking about it, like most of the balls that are caught going towards, because like that affordance is starting to decay because guys are starting to get moved more towards the lines now, be like on both sides. And so like those opportunities for doubles are somewhat shrinking for us a little bit. But if you top spin it, it's getting down. So at least it's a single, but if you hit it hard enough like this kid does, right, you can potentially then shoot that thing to the wall. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how the top spin's going to affect when it lands.
It'll make it roll better. I mean, because it's already going in that direction. So like, but the thing is when push comes to shove, if you're hitting the ball hard and you're hitting it to the outfield, don't change a thing. Because there are slumps and there are statistical slumps. And I think that's where a lot of people are trying to manufacture their success versus surrender to the nature of the game and really analyze like, okay, I'm hitting the ball hard into the outfield, but it's getting caught. It's just a matter of time. And
yeah, but what about, here's my question to that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, because where I'm going, and this is what Eco D has opened my eyes to, is like, I don't think we can exactly place where we want it on the field. But like, let's just be real. There are tractor states, right? If you're freaking mashing the ball hard and your launch angle happens to clump, right? And your ball characteristics happen to clump where the ball just going to where the left fielder is, maybe you got to just work a little bit of like not actually hitting it to that location, right? Like, I just think there's something about
you can
like
shift the field a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, like, cause to me, this is the thing of like, what frustrates me more, and this is not trying to call you out. It's just more just like, I'm thinking about like, cause going back to like people who say like, oh, just trust the process. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're doing well. Just keep doing it. And it's like, but you're hitting under the Mendoza line, like you're about to get cut. Oh yeah. It'll just, I mean, yeah, okay. Some of it's true. Like, Alex Kirilloff right there saying that for a while, but I mean, at a certain point, it's just like, or if you make an adjustment, cause like, for example, I'll use this kid cause he was not that strong, not that great, whatever. His max power was literally to where the outfielder is playing. So his first AB, he hits a really nice backside line drive to the left fielder out. He comes up, and I'm hoping it's because of the conversation in the environment of what I've told guys. He comes up next time, does the same exact thing, but just takes a little bit off. down for a single. He's on base, right? And like that was a big catalyst to starting that inning, to allowing us to have a great game. And so like for me, that's where it's like I'm not so married to that whole like, man, it's all about exit velo and all about no, like the game, what it's telling me is like you are rewarded when the ball gets down and a fielder does not catch it and or cannot get to it to throw you out at a base. And so I'm like, so tennis starts to become a little bit more like of a thing of like, sorry, Kyle, on this. I was trying to land the plane, but I do want to throw this in here if you can handle it, if it's okay. Ichiro versus like, you know, Ryan Howard or a Jose Batista or, you know, whatever. You can pick anybody, you know, basically to contrast against. Like, what's your take on that whole thing? Because I feel like that's, you know, yes, there's the things that you talked about. Like they literally told Ichiro to like not hit home runs. But at the same point, Ichiro has also said he also had a ton of fun trying to get hits other ways than just juicing it out of the park, even though he could do that. So I guess what's your take on like that mentality? Because if you take that mentality and add juice it out of the park, like all of a sudden you got a really, really fascinating player that's kind of, you know, somewhat equivalent to like an Aaron Judge right now. So I'm just kind of curious, like your thoughts on like those comparison type things of like the batting average debate and whatever.
Is that for me?
Yeah, Tommy. Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
No.
So I think it's related to what I'm saying of like
there's strategy. There's strategy here. So like okay, if I'm constantly doing the same thing over and over again, and like I said, there's statistical slumps, but it doesn't mean that the game isn't going to ask you to do something different. Like there is something about being able to hit the ball the other way on a hit and run, because that's strategy. Like you get a guy, if you get like a Ellie De La Cruz, he's going first, third every time. And now we have a runner in scoring position, which when I coached, I wanted to score as many runs as I could, but I knew the probability would go up as the more times I had guys on second and third. So if I can constantly get guys in scoring position, it puts pressure on the pitching, and also, you know, it opens the game for more strategy. And this is, for me, it's like, yeah, we want to hit the like exit velocity matters. Like they've done studies on that. It increases BABIP and expected hits. But you know, if you can only own one side of the field, that's not really having really a lot of control. And
also the defense, right?
Yeah.
Like the defensive, the defense also has these stats, right?
Yeah.
Like and this is to me where like, if you want to nullify the defense and what the defense is doing to you, you got to be able to somewhat alter, you know what I mean? Like, and this is where like, yeah, I was happy every time like Joey Gallo bunted and whatnot. So anyways, I say all that to, you know what I mean?
No,
but
I'm like,
he's giving
agree.
himself a chance. He's shifting the defense and giving himself a chance. So anyways,
my point is,
I think we may have to land the plane here.
But the last thing is, my point is you don't necessarily change mechanics. What you do is you explore how, like, it's more external cueing. Hey, like, you know, like they did this with, I still have the video, Tim Kirchin and Giancarlo Stanton. It was like, yeah, I always try to hit balls out in right center, because if I don't work on that, then I'll just start hitting home runs foul, and I won't keep anything fair. So like, I really tried in batting practice to understand what it's like to use that side of the field. So like 100%, because like when push comes to shove, you got to produce. And you know, if you're, whether they're hard outs or they're soft outs, they're still outs, and you got to, you know, you're going to play the hot hand. So yeah, I agree with you.
I'm going to put pressure on all of us, because have you ever guys ever listened to a podcast and they're like, man, this is great, we should do it again, and then the guy's never on the podcast again?
Oh, dude, I'll do it. I'll do it.
So
this is a highlight for me, man.
Yeah, this is great. And I appreciate your ability to be firm on certain things, but also then to be open on like, oh, no. Like, let me clarify this and let me do that. And I think there's, you know, we got a big old list of things that even that one that we touched point right there, that would be a great thing to dig deeper into. Oh,
yeah. Whenever you guys want, man. Like, I enjoy talking baseball, but I enjoy talking about the underlying aspects of humans that allow us to do the things that we love to do. So, and, you know, being able to talk with guys that appreciate things similarly to what I do, it's a lot of fun. So I really respect you guys, and I'm really grateful that I got this opportunity, and yeah, I mean, God puts us in certain places and lines us up for certain conversations. So, man, I would love to keep the ball rolling when we got time. So I really
Sounds
appreciate
good.
you all.
For the listeners, though, if they want to connect with you or just interested in following your stuff, where can they do that?
Oh man, that's tough these days. They can always DM me because I'm not into the rat race as much anymore. I think like after having kids and, that being online and trying to constantly explain myself without any sort of context, or even just like being able to try to fit my message to the masses rather than, because everyone becomes assumptuous in what you're saying. Yep. I always talk with people through DMs. If anyone writes me and it's like, obviously not a bot, some female that's half clothed, I'll respond. But it's I got away from that because it wasn't filling me with the right type of joy, and I also had kids, and I feel like my goal is to share information, but those who seek it, and not to say that I'm the authority on anything, but I am curious, and if they ask a question I can't answer, I'll admit that I don't have an answer, but I'll get back to them because I'll want to know. But if they reach out to me, I think on both of them, it's Prime Athlete. I think 314. I don't know. I don't even know my handle. But yeah.
I'll put it in the description.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. But yeah, no, but again, I'm really grateful that you guys had me on. This is a lot of fun. And, I've had a chance to, look at both of your guys' work throughout the years. And I really respect what you guys are doing and trying to accomplish with your athletes. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Well, hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast.